Have you ever wondered if consciousness ends with us, or if it quietly continues in other forms of life, in animals, plants, even machines? Tonight, we'll follow that question through the living web of awareness, from the first cells to artificial minds. Settle into calm curiosity. Let science unfold gently, like slow waves of thought. This is the Sleepy BrainDose. Stay with us until the end. When people hear the word consciousness, they often think of waking awareness, the bright field experience in which thoughts, sensations, and memories appear. Yet the more closely we examine it, the more elusive it becomes. Consciousness is both the most familiar and the most mysterious aspect of life. It is what makes a moment felt rather than merely processed, what turns the mechanical into the meaningful. Scientists, philosophers, and poets have tried to describe it for centuries. But every definition seems to slip through our fingers as soon as we believe we've grasped it at its simplest. Consciousness can be described as the state of having subjective experience of there being something it is like to be that organism. For a human, that experience includes color, sound, touch, memory, and emotion woven into a continuous sense of self. But this definition already raises a question. Does experience require a self at all? Can awareness exist without the inner narrator that says I? Modern neuroscience approaches the problem by mapping brain activity to states of awareness. Patterns of synchronized firing between regions, especially the thalamus, cortex, and midbrain, seem to correlate with whether a person is conscious or not. When those networks break down under anesthesia, in deep sleep, or in coma, consciousness fades. When the networks reintegrate, experience returns. This has led to the idea that consciousness depends on the integration of information across a complex system. But the mechanism, the precise way electrical activity turns into the light of experience, remains unknown. Philosophers call this the hard problem. We can describe what happens when we recognize a face or recall a memory, but not why those neural events feel like anything from the inside. Some researchers suggest that consciousness emerges when information reaches a certain threshold of complexity, while others argue that subjective experience may be a basic property of the universe, present in some minimal form, even in simple systems. The debate stretches from physics to metaphysics, from quantum mechanics to the philosophy of mind. Historically, ideas about consciousness have evolved alongside our understanding of the cosmos. In ancient times, the line between mind and world was porous. Life itself was seen as animated by spirit. The scientific revolution brought a sharp distinction. Matter was mechanical, mind was immaterial. René Descartes imagined animals as automatons, clever machines without feelings, while the human soul stood apart. That dualism shaped science for centuries. Only with Charles Darwin did we begin to see mental life as part of an evolutionary continuum. If humans evolved from earlier species, then awareness too must have deep biological roots. Today, the study of consciousness blends disciplines that once had little contact. Neurophysiology measures brain rhythms. Psychology explores perception and behavior. Computer science models cognition. Philosophy analyzes the logic of experience. Each offers partial answers, yet none fully captures what it means to be aware. In laboratories, subjects watch images while their brain waves are recorded, hoping to reveal the neural signature of consciousness. But in everyday life, awareness remains something we live through rather than observe. A gentle paradox lies here. The mind cannot step entirely outside itself. To study consciousness is to use consciousness as both the instrument and the object of inquiry. Every observation is filtered through the very process we hope to explain. It is like trying to see the lens through which all seeing occurs. From a biological perspective, consciousness may be an evolved function. It binds sensory input into coherent scenes, predicts outcomes, and guides flexible behavior. In that sense, awareness could be the brain's way of modeling itself and its environment. Yet such functional accounts often leave something missing: the inner texture, the warmth of emotion, the immediacy of pain or joy. These qualities, known as qualia, form the subjective palette of experience. Whether they can ever be measured or reduced to computation is still uncertain. Over the last decades, advances in brain imaging have allowed scientists to track consciousness in unprecedented detail. Functional MRI reveals dynamic networks that shift as attention moves. Electroencephalography detects bursts of coherence when we recognize a pattern or hear our name. These findings suggest that awareness is not located in a single spot, but arises from coordination across many regions. Still, the correlation does not equal cause. We see where consciousness is, not why it feels. Outside the laboratory, new questions emerge. If consciousness depends on integrated information, could it appear in artificial systems? Could a sufficiently complex machine ever truly experience the world? And if some animals show similar patterns of neural integration, might they share a comparable inner life? Such questions stretch the boundaries of science toward ethics and empathy. They remind us that the mystery of consciousness is not only theoretical, but also moral. It shapes how we treat other beings. In recent years, researchers have proposed several frameworks to classify levels of awareness. One of the most influential is the global workspace theory, which compares the brain to a theater. Many unconscious processes work behind the scenes, but consciousness arises when information reaches the central stage, a workspace that broadcasts to the rest of the system. Another approach, integrated information theory, quantifies how much information a system generates beyond the sum of its parts. A highly integrated system, such as a human brain, would therefore have a high degree of consciousness. Simpler systems less. These models are not final answers, but attempts to translate subjective phenomena into measurable principles. Unites all these perspectives is the recognition that consciousness is not a binary switch, but a gradient. Between wakefulness and dream, between focus and reverie, we move through shades of awareness each day. The same may be true across species and systems. Consciousness as a spectrum rather than a privilege. In this light, life itself appears as a continuum of sensitivity, from the faint responsiveness of single cells to the reflective self-awareness of humans. Such a view dissolves the rigid boundaries once drawn between mind and matter. Instead of asking where consciousness begins, we might ask how it unfolds. Every organism interacts with the world in ways shaped by its structure. A bat through echoes, a bee through polarized light, a fish through vibrations in water. Each creates its own version of reality, its own interior perspective. To explore non-human consciousness, then, we must first understand consciousness itself, not as an exclusive human possession, but as a process, a way of relating to information, sensation, and change. Awareness may take forms utterly unlike our own, yet governed by the same underlying principles of integration and adaptation. When seen this way, the mystery becomes less about who has consciousness and more about how it manifests. Even within the human experience, awareness varies across time. Under anesthesia, it vanishes. In dreams, it transforms. In meditation, it can widen or dissolve. Such variability suggests that consciousness is dynamic, modulated rather than fixed. This flexibility might be a clue. Perhaps consciousness is not a thing but a pattern, one that emerges wherever matter becomes organized enough to model itself. If that is so, then studying other forms of awareness, animal, plant, or artificial, is not an act of comparison, but of recognition. It is a search for the universal principles behind the private worlds that flicker throughout nature. Every brain, every network, every living system may contribute a verse to the long story of experience in the quiet perspective of calm science. Consciousness stands as the meeting point of biology and mystery. It invites humility, because each explanation deepens the wonder rather than erasing it. The more we learn about the neural circuits that generate awareness, the more clearly we see how extraordinary it is that matter can contemplate itself. Somewhere within that recognition lies the gentle threshold to our next question. If awareness is not unique to humans, where else might it dwell? How far beyond our species does the light of experience extend, and in what unfamiliar forms might it appear? From the moment humans began to wonder what made them different, the study of consciousness entered the realm of comparison. To ask, what is awareness, is in part to ask, how does ours relate to theirs? For centuries, this question shaped both science and philosophy, a slow unfolding of self-recognition across history. The first great turning point came with the philosophers of classical Greece. Thinkers such as Aristotle and Plato saw reason as the defining mark of humanity. Animals, in their view, possessed perception and desire, but not the capacity for abstract thought. The human mind, capable of reflection and moral choice, was placed above the natural order. This early hierarchy of minds would echo through the ages, forming the foundation of Western thought about what it means to be conscious in the centuries that followed. Spiritual traditions across the world offered different answers. In many Eastern philosophies, the boundary between human and non-human awareness was thinner. Hindu and Buddhist thought often viewed consciousness as a universal field, one that could manifest through countless living forms. The human experience was not unique, but a temporary focus within a vast continuum of awareness. These ancient ideas, while metaphysical, carried an intuition that modern science is only beginning to explore. That consciousness might not be confined to one kind of brain. When the scientific revolution arrived in the 17th century, the language of inquiry changed. René Descartes divided existence into res cogitans, the thinking substance, and res extensa, the extended physical world. In this dualistic view, humans alone possessed an immaterial soul capable of thought and reflection. Animals were complex machines, driven by instinct and mechanism, but devoid of inner life. Their cries and movements, Descartes argued, were mere reflexes, not expressions of feeling. This mechanistic image of the natural world shaped biology for generations. It encouraged experimentation, but at the cost of empathy. The notion of animals as unfeeling automatons justified practices that today we would find ethically troubling. It also reinforced a deep separation, the human as conscious observer, nature as unconscious object. Yet even within this framework, questions lingered. Observers noticed the intelligence of birds, the loyalty of dogs, the curiosity of apes. Travelers and naturalists recorded behaviors that seemed to suggest more than reflex. Could machines show affection, or plan, or mourn? The answers were inconvenient for a purely mechanical view, and so they were often dismissed as projection, humans imagining their own emotions in animals. Then, in the 19th century, Charles Darwin quietly eroded that wall. His theory of evolution by natural selection proposed that all species share common ancestry. If the human body arose through gradual change, then the human mind must have done so as well. In his 1871 work, The Descent of Man, Darwin wrote that the difference between human and animal minds was one of degree and not of kind. Intelligence, curiosity, and emotion existed across species, each adapted to its environment. This was a radical idea. Consciousness was no longer the exclusive gift of humanity, but an evolutionary continuum. Darwin's insight transformed the philosophy of mind into a branch of natural history. If cognition could evolve, it could also be studied. Researchers began to observe animal behavior systematically, searching for signs of problem-solving, memory, and emotion. The emerging field of comparative psychology sought to map the shared capacities between humans and other creatures. Early experiments were crude by modern standards, but revealed striking patterns. Dogs learned to associate signals with rewards. Birds demonstrated navigation far beyond simple reflex. Octopuses unscrewed jars to reach food. Each observation chipped away at the assumption that humans alone possessed flexible intelligence. At the same time, the human sense of self remained a powerful reference point. The mirror test, first developed by psychologist Gordon Gallup in the 1970s, became a benchmark for self-awareness. When an animal is marked with a visible spot and given a mirror, its reaction is revealing. If it touches its own body rather than the reflection, it recognizes the image as me. Chimpanzees, dolphins, elephants, magpies, and even some fish have passed this test, suggesting a capacity for self-recognition. Still, the mirror test is not an absolute measure. Many species rely on senses other than vision. For them, the reflection may hold no meaning. A dog, guided by scent, might never care about the image before it, yet could possess a rich sense of self through smell and memory. Awareness, it seems, wears many faces. Some we recognize, others we can barely imagine. Through the 20th century, comparative cognition expanded beyond behaviorism. Rather than viewing animals as stimulus response machines, scientists began to explore internal states, attention, emotion, even empathy. Primatologist Jane Goodall's observations of chimpanzees revealed tool use, social bonds, and mourning rituals. Marine biologists documented the elaborate communication of whales and dolphins, whose songs carry across entire oceans. Corvids, crows, and ravens demonstrated planning and problem-solving on par with young children. These findings suggested not just intelligence, but layered forms of awareness shaped by ecology and social life. The shift was not merely scientific, it was philosophical. To study the minds of others required humility, the willingness to accept that consciousness might look different in different bodies. The human mirror, once used to judge, became a tool for empathy. Rather than asking, "Do they think like us?" researchers began to ask, "What does the world feel like to them?" This approach, sometimes called Umwelt theory, originated with biologist Jacob von Uescol. He proposed that every organism lives in its own perceptual world, a umwelt, defined by its sensory capacities. A bat's universe is built from echoes, A bees from ultraviolet light, a fish's from pressure waves. To each, reality has a distinct texture and rhythm. Human consciousness is only one version among countless possible ones. Modern neuroscience reinforces this view. Brains, regardless of species, share common principles. They receive signals, predict outcomes, and adapt through feedback. Yet the architecture varies. The cephalopod's distributed nervous system, the bird's dense forebrain, the mammal's layered cortex. Each structure produces its own style of cognition. The human mind, with its language and reflection, is a specialization, not a crown. Our tendency to compare, however, is deeply rooted. The mirror we hold to other beings is also the mirror we hold to ourselves. By defining the boundaries of consciousness, we define our place in nature. For much of history, those boundaries were drawn to separate us, to confirm that humanity was exceptional. But as evidence accumulates of complex cognition in other species, that line blurs. The more we look, the more continuity we find. Today, the human mirror extends even further into technology and artificial intelligence. Machines can now recognize patterns, generate language, and simulate aspects of reasoning. Though this development belongs to another chapter, it continues the same ancient impulse to see ourselves reflected in the minds we create, and to ask whether those reflections might one day awaken. There is also an ethical consequence. If consciousness is a spectrum, then our moral concern cannot stop at the human threshold. Understanding the inner lives of animals has already changed how societies view captivity, testing, and habitat destruction. Laws protecting great apes, whales, and elephants stem from the recognition that they experience the world in ways more similar to ours than we once believed. The act of comparison then becomes more than a scientific tool. It becomes a mirror for compassion. To acknowledge awareness beyond our species is to soften the boundary between self and other. It reminds us that intelligence and feeling are not the property of one lineage, but expressions of life's capacity to sense and respond. Over time, this awareness shapes our language, art, and imagination. Ancient myths once gave animals voices and wisdom. Modern science gives them data and evidence. Both, in their own way, point toward a shared continuity of experience. The human mirror reflects not just our superiority, but our kinship. Perhaps this recognition marks a new stage in the evolution of understanding. Where Descartes saw machines, we now see minds. Where Darwin saw continuity, we now see connection. Each discovery brings a quiet humility, the realization that our consciousness is one thread in a vast biological tapestry woven over millions of years. And yet, the story of comparison is not complete. Having recognized the presence of awareness in other species, science now turns toward its structure and diversity. What kinds of emotions, decisions, or even dreams might arise in non-human minds? How do their forms of cognition differ from ours, not in degree, but in kind? To explore that question, we must step beyond reflection and into direct observation, into the living, responsive intelligence of the animal world itself. The next step in this calm inquiry leads us there, into the inner workings of the animal mind, where perception, memory, and feeling unfold in ways at once alien and familiar. For most of history, the inner world of animals was hidden behind silence. They shared our environment, our air, our food chains, yet their minds seemed unreachable. People observed their behavior, the flight of birds, the play of dolphins, the alert eyes of dogs, but rarely questioned what those actions meant from the inside. Today, the walls between species are thinner. Modern ethology, neuroscience, and psychology have begun to reveal patterns of intelligence, memory, and emotion that suggest animals experience not only the world, but also themselves. In complex ways, the first real shift came in the 20th century, when field researchers left laboratories and entered the habitats of the creatures they studied. In the forests of Gombe, Jane Goodall documented chimpanzees making and using tools, shaping sticks to fish for termites. They modified their techniques over time, shared them socially, and even seemed to teach the young. These were not the mechanical reactions of instinct, but the flexible learning of observation and culture. Goodall also saw grief. Mothers carrying the bodies of dead infants for days, companions sitting quietly beside the dying. Her reports challenged the assumption that emotions belonged only to humans. At the same time, studies in marine environments revealed similar patterns among cetaceans. Dolphins learned new tricks by imitation and developed signature whistles functioning like names. They coordinated complex hunts, synchronizing movements with astonishing precision. In one experiment, two dolphins learned to press buttons on opposite sides of a pool at the same time without visible cues, evidence of communication or a shared understanding of task. Whales, too, displayed behaviors suggesting culture, regional dialects in their songs. Traditions passed across generations and occasional cooperative interactions with humans. Among birds, corvids stand as intellectual equals to many mammals. Crows use tools, plan several steps ahead, and understand cause and effect. In laboratory tests, New Caledonian crows bent wire into hooks to retrieve food, a form of spontaneous problem-solving rarely seen outside primates. Ravens cache food in hidden places and remember not only where they hid it, but who was watching. They even rehide food if they suspect another bird saw them, implying an ability to model another's perspective, a rudimentary theory of mind. Elephants, long symbols of memory, have shown emotional depth supported by observation and neuroscience. Their brains, though different in structure, contain networks associated with empathy and social learning. Herds have been seen pausing around the bones of dead elephants, touching skulls and tusks gently with their trunks. This ritual behavior mirrors mourning, suggesting awareness of loss. In captivity, elephants cooperate to solve mechanical puzzles, coordinating roles with patience and persistence. Such coordination requires not only intelligence, but trust, an emotional framework, underpinning social life. Even creatures far removed from us on the evolutionary tree, such as octopuses, display remarkable cognition. With nervous systems distributed through their arms, they solve mazes, unscrew jars, and manipulate objects with deliberate curiosity. Each arm acts semi-independently, yet all converge into coherent action. The octopus seems to embody a decentralized mind, one that blurs the line between brain and body. Some scientists suggest that if we wish to understand truly alien consciousness, we should start not with machines, but with cephalopods. These examples invite a broader realization. Intelligence in animals is not a single ladder with humans at the top, but a branching tree. Each species has evolved awareness suited to its ecological niche. Birds excel at spatial memory for migration, dolphins at auditory communication, apes at tool manipulation and social politics. Each mind reflects the world it inhabits. In the calm continuity of evolution, cognition diversified as life diversified. The challenge for science is measurement. Because animals cannot describe their experiences, researchers infer mental states through behavior and physiology. Heart rate, hormone levels, and neural imaging provide glimpses of emotional and cognitive responses. Dogs, for instance, show increased oxytocin when gazing at familiar humans, the same hormone involved in human bonding. Sheep recognize faces. Rats emit ultrasonic laughs during play. Cuttlefish change patterns when confronted with novel stimuli, suggesting curiosity or surprise. Such findings replace the old debate of "do animals think?" with a subtler question: how do they think? One key insight has been the role of mirror neurons, brain, cells that fire, both when an animal acts and when it observes another performing the same action. First identified in monkeys, mirror neurons are now found across species and are believed to support imitation, empathy, and learning. They offer a neural basis for emotional contagion, why distress in one member of a herd or group spreads quickly to others. Through shared neural mirroring, social animals experience a primitive form of understanding, the ability to feel what another feels without language. Communication systems in animals often reveal this empathy in action. Prairie dogs produce alarm calls that differ depending on the predator species, size, and approach, indicating a capacity for semantic detail. Honeybees dance to convey the direction and distance of food sources relative to the sun. Parrots and corvids mimic sounds not by simple repetition, but through contextual understanding, adjusting tone and rhythm to social settings. Each instance shows cognition woven tightly into behavior, a language shaped not by grammar, but by survival. Recent research into animal memory also deepens the picture. Scrub jays remember what they hid, where, and when, a triad of information once thought uniquely human. This episodic-like memory suggests that some animals can mentally travel in time, recalling past experiences and planning future actions. Experiments with great apes demonstrate foresight. Chimpanzees save tools for tasks they will perform hours later, indicating awareness that the future can differ from the present. The emotional lives of animals, though harder to quantify, leave traces in physiology and behavior. Stress hormones mirror psychological states, much like in humans. Joy, too, can be observed. Dolphins playing with bubbles, crows sliding down snowy roofs, dogs engaging in social play that follows clear emotional rules. Pleasure and curiosity appear not as luxuries, but as integral components of adaptation, signals that guide learning and strengthen bonds, understanding. These experiences changes how science interprets evolution. Consciousness is no longer viewed as a sudden leap, but as a gradual refinement of information processing and emotional regulation. The same neural chemistry, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, flows through countless species, orchestrating motivation and feeling. Awareness, in this sense, is not confined to a single design, but emerges wherever life needs to evaluate. Choose and connect to grasp the depth of this diversity. It helps to imagine consciousness not as a single light switched on or off, but as a spectrum of luminosity. Some minds burn bright with reflective thought. Others shimmer faintly through instinct and sensation. Yet all participate in the same continuity of perception. Perhaps this is the quiet unity of life, each creature carrying a fragment of experience within its own rhythm of existence. Neuroscientists now map brain activity in a wake. Behaving animals, using technologies that preserve natural movement and interaction. Functional imaging of birds and mammals reveals similar network patterns associated with attention and sleep, suggesting convergent solutions to awareness. Cephalopods, though structured differently, show comparable electrical complexity. As methods improve, the line between human and non-human consciousness continues to blur. One subtle realization emerges from all these findings. The animal mind is not alien but adjacent. Its patterns of learning, feeling, and sociality differ in degree, not in essence. To recognize this is to move from curiosity to respect. Scientific understanding becomes an act of connection, a recognition that our capacity to think and feel is shared, not solitary. Some researchers even propose that empathy across species may hold evolutionary benefits. Early humans who could read the intentions of animals might have hunted more effectively or formed mutualistic bonds. Over time, that sensitivity deepened into domestication and companionship. The dog by the fire, the horse on the plain, the bird on the branch, each reflects centuries of intertwined adaptation between minds. the exploration of the animal mind, then is not merely a quest to measure intelligence, but to trace the evolution of awareness itself. Every study, from the play of ravens to the problem-solving of octopuses, adds a note to the broader understanding of consciousness as a biological phenomenon. It shows that experience is not the privilege of a few species, but the common heritage of life. As we observe animals with greater empathy and precision, the question shifts once more. If awareness can emerge in so many forms, what are the boundaries of its expression? Does consciousness extend into systems beyond the animal kingdom, into the subtle sensing of plants, or the collective coordination of ecosystems? The next step in this exploration leads there, into forms of intelligence without a brain, where communication and adaptation continue in silence beneath the soil and among the leaves. The question of whether animals have language has long fascinated scientists and philosophers. For much of history, human speech was seen as the clear line dividing us from other species, a sign of higher thought and self-awareness. Language allowed complex cooperation, abstract ideas, and memory preserved across generations. Yet as we have learned more about animal communication, that sharp boundary has softened. Across land, sea, and sky, countless species exchange information with sophistication and nuance, revealing that the impulse to share meaning may be one of life's most ancient and unifying traits. Communication exists wherever signals alter behavior. A bird's call warning of a hawk, a bee's dance indicating food, a dolphin's whistle identifying its companion. Each is a message, structured and purposeful. What distinguishes human language is its open-endedness. We can combine symbols in infinite ways to describe events past, present, or imagined. Still, many animal systems approach this flexibility more closely than once believed. The most familiar examples are vocal. Songbirds produce sequences of notes with syntax-like rules, where rearranging elements changes meaning. Research on the Japanese gray tit found that these birds combine simple calls into compound phrases that alter behavior in listeners. One note signals look, another come here, but together they mean look and approach, forming a primitive grammar. This structure hints that the roots of syntax predate human speech by millions of years. Whales and dolphins display even more intricate communication. Humpback whale songs can last for hours, consisting of repeating themes and phrases that evolve over time. Entire populations adopt new variations, suggesting cultural transmission. These songs serve both social and reproductive roles, broadcasting identity and coordination across ocean basins. Dolphins, meanwhile, use signature whistles that function much like names, unique identifiers learned early in life. When separated, individuals call out one another's signature whistle, and recordings show that they can recognize these sounds even after years apart. Such memory and vocal imitation suggest a form of social language shaped by emotional bonds. Among land mammals, elephants rely on a spectrum of sound from infrasonic rumbles to trumpets audible over kilometers. The low frequencies travel through ground and air, allowing herds to coordinate movements across vast distances. Each call conveys information about the caller's age, sex, and emotional state. Mothers and calves maintain contact through distinctive rumbles that strengthen attachment. Researchers have found evidence that elephants even give individual names, subtle frequency modulations that others recognize. These findings reshape how we view the emotional and communicative lives of large-brained species. Yet not all animal languages are vocal. Bees use motion instead of sound. In the famous waggle dance, discovered by Carl von Frisch, a returning forager encodes the direction and distance of nectar sources relative to the sun's position. The dance changes with time of day and the shifting angle of sunlight, integrating celestial geometry into communication. This complex system, executed within the dark hive, demonstrates that meaningful information can be shared without words, sound, or sight through the rhythm of motion itself. In the oceans, cuttlefish and squid convey emotion and intent through color. Networks of pigment cells called chromatophores expand or contract, producing rippling patterns across the skin. A flash of contrast can warn rivals, attract mates, or disguise the body against predators. These rapid changes are under direct neural control, functioning like instantaneous language written on the body. Observing them feels like watching thought become visible. Among primates, communication takes yet another form: gestures. Chimpanzees and bonobos use dozens of hand and body signals to coordinate play, request food, or reconcile after conflict. These gestures are flexible rather than fixed, varying by community and context. Field studies have documented young apes learning gestures by imitation, a process resembling the way human infants acquire body language before speech. Some of these signals even show cross-species comprehension. Humans familiar with chimpanzee behavior can often infer the meaning of their gestures. Intuitively, such examples challenge the idea that only humans combine symbols, emotion, and learning in communication. They also raise an important distinction: the difference between language and communication. All animals communicate. Few possess language in the human sense. But as we uncover more about the cognitive and social complexity behind these systems, the gap narrows. The more intricately species share meaning, the harder it becomes to draw a rigid boundary. Neuroscience adds another layer to this understanding. Studies using brain imaging and electrophysiology reveal that many species process sounds and patterns hierarchically, as humans do. Songbirds have brain regions functionally analogous to our auditory cortex and Broca's area. Dolphins display activity consistent with structured processing when hearing whistles. These parallels suggest that evolution reused similar neural architectures for communication long before human speech emerged. Language, then, may not have appeared suddenly, but grown gradually from pre-existing capacities shared across species. Emotion plays a central role in all these systems. Communication is not only about facts, but about states of being: fear, joy, alarm, desire. Alarm calls among vervet monkeys differ for leopards, snakes, and eagles. Each triggers a specific defensive response. Prairie dogs produce calls describing the shape, color, and size of predators, demonstrating a surprising degree of descriptive power. The purpose is survival, but the mechanism involves categorization and recognition, fundamental components of thought. Human language, in its richness, often hides the simplicity that underlies it. At its core lies association, sound linked to meaning, gesture to intent. Many species share this foundation. Parrots, especially African greys, can learn human words and use them contextually, not merely as mimicry. Alex, the famous parrot studied by Irene Pepperberg, could identify colors, shapes, and materials, even combine concepts like bigger green key. His ability showed not just memory, but comprehension, the ability to map symbols onto abstract categories. Even more surprising are findings from research on non-vocal animals. Ants use chemical trails that adjust dynamically to group needs, a form of distributed computation guiding the colony. Wolves communicate through posture and gaze, integrating subtle cues to maintain hierarchy and cooperation. These examples illustrate that language need not be verbal. It can emerge through any medium that reliably carries Information and intention. Understanding animal communication also reshapes our approach to conservation. When we recognize that species possess cultures, dialects, and learned traditions, the loss of a population becomes more than biological. It is the extinction of knowledge. The disappearance of a whale pod erases not only genes but songs. The decline of an elephant matriarch silences decades of learned wisdom. Preserving biodiversity thus includes preserving these living languages of the earth. It is easy to think of human speech as the pinnacle of communication, yet perhaps it is only one branch of a vast evolutionary tree. In the quiet exchanges of other species, we glimpse the origins of our own voices. Communication began not with words, but with rhythm, signals of danger, comfort, and cooperation carried through the air, water, or soil. Each species continues that rhythm in its own tone, woven into the ongoing conversation of life. As we listen more closely, our perspective widens. The diversity of animal communication suggests that language, in its broadest sense, is not the property of a single species, but a principle of nature, the drive to connect, to share, to make sense of the world together. The human voice is only one instrument in that symphony. This realization leads naturally to another dimension of awareness. Communication does not exist without emotion, and emotion, in turn, reflects empathy, the capacity to feel with another being. Having explored how animals share information, the next step is to understand how they share feeling, the networks of emotion, care, and compassion that underpin the living dialogue between minds. For a long time, science hesitated to speak of animal emotions. Feelings were considered too subjective, too human. Behavior could be measured. Emotion could not. Early researchers preferred neutral terms like arousal or motivation, avoiding words such as joy or grief. Yet over time, evidence accumulated that animals do not simply react, they feel. Their physiology, behavior, and even brain structures mirror our own emotional systems with striking fidelity. Today, the study of animal emotion stands as one of the most transformative areas in understanding consciousness. The realization that the experience of feeling may be shared far more widely than we once believed. At the biological level, emotions are ancient regulators of behavior. They evolved to guide organisms toward survival, approach what sustains, avoid what harms, connect where cooperation helps. The same neurochemicals that shape human moods, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, cortisol, operate across mammals, birds, and even some invertebrates. When a rat anticipates a reward, its brain releases dopamine just as ours does. When an elephant mother bonds with her calf, oxytocin rises in both. These shared pathways reveal that emotion is not an invention of language, but a mechanism rooted deep in the architecture of life. Fear, the most studied emotion, provides a clear example. In laboratory tests, mice, monkeys, and even fish exhibit measurable fear responses, elevated heart rate, widened pupils, stress hormones. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped region in the brain, lights up across species when danger looms. These reactions serve adaptive functions, priming muscles and senses for action. Yet fear also teaches. Through memory, animals learn to associate certain sounds or scents with threat, demonstrating that emotional experience shapes behavior through cognition. Beyond fear lies a quieter range of emotion: pleasure, curiosity, comfort, and play. Rats emit high-frequency chirps, a kind of laughter, when tickled by researchers or engaged in play with companions. Dogs wag their tails, not just in excitement, but in nuanced patterns, expressing different emotional states. Dolphins blow rings of bubbles for fun, repeating the activity with visible enjoyment. Such behaviors do not fit the logic of survival alone. They suggest intrinsic motivation, the joy of exploration and social contact. Empathy, the ability to share or respond to another's emotional state, appears even more remarkable. It requires recognition of others as beings who can feel. Among mammals, this capacity is widespread. Mice freeze in response to the distress of cage mates, even when not directly harmed. Chimpanzees console victims of aggression with gentle touches and embraces. Elephants have been observed assisting injured companions, adjusting their pace to support the weak. These acts reveal not just mimicry, but emotional resonance, an inner alignment of feeling that guides compassion. Neuroscience offers clues to how such resonance arises. Mirror neurons, first discovered in macaque monkeys, fire both when an animal performs an action and when it sees another do the same. In humans, similar networks activate during empathy, linking observation to emotion. When we see another being suffer, our pain centers respond faintly, as if experiencing a shadow of their state. This mechanism, ancient and conserved, suggests that empathy may have evolved from the same neural circuits that once allowed animals to coordinate movements and predict each other's actions. Birds provide surprising examples as well. Ravens and crows comfort distressed peers and form alliances that depend on social awareness. Parrots demonstrate affiliative behaviors, preening companions in response to agitation. In some cases, these bonds endure for life. The complexity of avian social structures, cooperation, jealousy, reconciliation, indicates emotional intelligence comparable in function to that of many mammals. The brain of a bird, though organized differently, contains regions analogous to the mammalian limbic system, underscoring convergent evolution of feeling. Grief remains one of the most profound and visible emotions observed in animals. When a matriarch elephant dies, her herd gathers around the body, touching it with trunks, lingering for hours or days. Orcas have been seen carrying the bodies of deceased calves for weeks, behavior difficult to explain through instinct alone. Primates show similar mourning rituals, sitting quietly beside the dead, refusing food for days. Grief, as biologists describe it, may not mirror human mourning precisely, but it reflects an awareness of absence, a response to the loss of connection that once anchored emotional life. Play, in contrast, represents the other pole of emotion, the lightness of being that emerges when safety allows curiosity to flourish. It has been documented in creatures as different as octopuses, foxes, and parrots. Play refines motor skills, strengthens bonds, and fosters cognitive flexibility. Neurochemically, it activates the brain's reward systems, linking joy to learning. Some researchers describe play as the evolutionary rehearsal of empathy. By swapping roles and testing reactions, young animals learn the emotional rules of social life. Understanding emotion in animals also requires cultural humility. Human interpretation often projects familiar expressions onto other species, yet real empathy demands awareness of difference. A wagging tail, a flattened ear, or a low-frequency call can mean distinct things depending on species and context. Careful observation reveals that emotions are both universal and specific, shaped by physiology, but expressed through unique behavioral languages. Recognizing these subtleties deepens our understanding not only of animals, but of emotion itself as a flexible biological language. From an evolutionary perspective, empathy likely conferred survival advantages. Groups that cooperated and supported members under stress outperformed those that did not. Shared emotion improved coordination, strengthened parental care, and facilitated learning. Over time, Neural systems that rewarded connection were preserved and elaborated. In humans, these circuits expanded into moral reasoning and culture. In other species, they remain as quiet threads of social harmony woven through daily life. Modern research uses advanced imaging and field observation to quantify emotion with increasing precision. Functional MRI scans show similar patterns of activation in animal brains during bonding, stress, and play. Hormonal assays track oxytocin and cortisol fluctuations across social events. Even heart rate synchrony between humans and dogs has been measured during moments of eye contact, a physiological rhythm of mutual trust. Such studies confirm what many have intuited for centuries, that emotional life is not a uniquely human phenomenon, but a shared heritage of sentient existence. As we uncover this shared capacity, ethical implications arise. Recognizing that animals can suffer or feel joy transforms how societies approach farming, conservation, and captivity. Welfare standards now incorporate behavioral and psychological well-being alongside physical health. Sanctuaries and enrichment programs aim to provide stimulation, companionship, and autonomy, the conditions under which emotion and cognition can thrive. This shift reflects a broader philosophical transition, from viewing animals as reactive organisms to acknowledging them as emotional subjects of their own experiences. Emotion and empathy also blur the line between individuality and connection. To feel with another is to sense the continuity of life across bodies and species. In that realization lies a quiet form of kinship, not sentimental, but grounded in biology. Every shared glance, every coordinated movement, every instance of care becomes part of a long evolutionary conversation about cooperation and understanding. From this perspective, empathy is more than an emotional response. It is a form of knowledge. It tells us about the inner states of others when words are impossible. It teaches adaptation through relationship, and it suggests that the roots of consciousness may be relational, arising not within isolated brains, but between them. In the subtle exchanges of feeling that bind living systems together. In observing the emotional worlds of animals, we glimpse an expanded view of mind, one that includes connection, compassion, and memory as essential components of awareness. The next step in this exploration leads us deeper into the physical foundation of that awareness, into the architecture of brains themselves, and how evolution has built many different forms of cognition to serve the same enduring purpose: to feel, to perceive, and to know. When we speak about consciousness, we often imagine the human brain, a folded mass of gray matter weighing a little over a kilogram, divided into hemispheres, lobes, and intricate layers. For centuries, it has served as the measure of intellect and awareness, the reference point for all comparisons. Yet nature has produced many different kinds of brains, each sculpted by evolution to fit the needs of its species. Some are vast and complex. Others are tiny, yet remarkably efficient. Each represents a unique solution to the same challenge: how to process information, respond to the environment, and sustain life. The human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, organized into networks that handle perception, memory, and decision-making. But the same basic cell, the neuron, also forms the foundation of octopus arms, bird forebrains, and even the tiny nervous systems of insects. What varies is not the type of cell, but its architecture, how it connects, how signals flow, and how patterns of activity generate behavior. The diversity of these structures reminds us that there is no single blueprint for intelligence or awareness among mammals. The neocortex has long been seen as the seat of higher cognition. Its layered organization allows vast communication between regions, supporting sensory integration, planning, and language. Primates and dolphins, with their expanded cortices, display particularly rich social and cognitive repertoires. But the story of complex minds does not end there. Birds, lacking a true neocortex, evolved a different structure, the pallium, that performed similar functions through a distinct arrangement of cells. Despite the anatomical differences, the avian pallium supports problem-solving, local learning, and even tool use, suggesting convergent evolution toward the same cognitive capacities. This convergence highlights an essential truth. Evolution does not design from scratch, but adapts existing materials to new purposes. Brains evolve like ecosystems, through variation, feedback, and gradual refinement. The cephalopods, including octopuses and cuttlefish, provide one of the most striking examples. Their nervous systems are distributed rather than centralized. 2/3 of an octopus's neurons reside in its arms, allowing each limb to sense, decide, and act semi-independently. The central brain coordinates these autonomous units through feedback loops, creating a system that blurs the boundary between body and mind. Such decentralization challenges our assumptions about control and selfhood. While humans experience the body as governed from a single center, the octopus operates more like an orchestra without a conductor, each instrument responsive to its own environment, yet contributing to the larger harmony. Researchers studying octopus behavior note remarkable flexibility and individuality. Some are shy, others curious. Some solve puzzles quickly, others ignore them. Their brains, though alien in design, achieve something that feels familiar: curiosity, play, and adaptive learning. Insects, too, offer surprising examples of efficient intelligence. A honeybee's brain contains fewer than 1 million neurons, less than 1/10,000th of a human brain, yet it can navigate complex landscapes, communicate abstract information through dance, and recognize individual flowers by color and scent. Bees even show a form of numerical cognition, distinguishing small quantities and performing basic addition. These abilities emerge from compact neural circuits optimized for pattern recognition and spatial memory. Scale, it turns out, does not determine sophistication. Fish, often underestimated, display advanced neural integration as well. Species such as electric fish use specialized brain regions to interpret electric fields, building three-dimensional maps of their surroundings in murky waters. Others, like cichlids, show social hierarchies maintained through memory and recognition. Brain scans reveal that the same neurotransmitters governing human social behavior, dopamine, serotonin, and vasopressin, also shape these interactions. Evolution has reused chemical tools again and again, weaving emotion and cognition into the fabric of life across aquatic, aerial, and terrestrial worlds. The mammalian brain itself is a spectrum of specialization. Bats devote much of their cortex to auditory processing. Moles emphasize touch. Primates expand vision. Dolphins and whales have highly folded cortices, with neuron densities rivaling or exceeding those of humans. Their brains contain spindle neurons, cells linked to empathy and self-awareness, suggesting parallel evolution of social intelligence. These similarities remind us that consciousness is not confined to one lineage, but emerges wherever complex neural systems integrate experience. Still, brains differ not only in structure, but in rhythm. Each species perceives time, motion, and sensation according to its physiology. A fly's visual system refreshes far faster than ours, creating a world of slowed motion. For it, a human's gesture may appear as a drawn-out wave. Such temporal scaling shapes how consciousness feels from within. The same external event unfolds differently in each nervous system, crafting unique subjective worlds. Recent advances in comparative neuroscience help decode these differences. Techniques such as connectomics, mapping every neural connection, reveal patterns that underlie intelligence across taxa. While the number of neurons correlates loosely with behavioral complexity, the degree of connectivity and feedback appears far more crucial. Brains with dense, recurrent loops allow flexible behavior and memory, supporting what we interpret as awareness. Even simple organisms, like the nematode Caenorhabditis elegans with its 302 neurons, exhibit decision-making that cannot be fully predicted by reflex alone. These findings lead to an intriguing perspective. Consciousness may not depend on the presence of a particular brain region, but on the dynamic flow of information within the system. Whether centralized, as in mammals, or distributed, as in cephalopods, awareness arises when signals integrate into coherent patterns that represent the environment and the self's relation to it. The architecture varies, but the principle remains. Integration breeds experience. From this viewpoint, the brain becomes less a physical object and more a process, a continuous conversation of cells exchanging signals, adjusting, learning. The mind is what that conversation feels like from the inside. This gentle realization dissolves rigid distinctions between species, inviting us to see every nervous system as a variation on a shared biological theme, the dance of perception and response that defines life. The study of brains across species also deepens our understanding of resilience. Damage to one part of a brain can lead to reorganization elsewhere, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. Birds recovering from injury may rewire vocal centers. Mammals form new pathways after trauma. Even octopuses regrow lost arms, complete with functional neural circuits. This adaptability reflects evolution's central principle. Flexibility sustains awareness in calm reflection. It becomes clear that there is no single model for consciousness. The human brain, though extraordinary, is only one expression of a wider creative process. Each form, from the distributed intelligence of insects to the fluid cognition of cephalopods, adds a chapter to the story of how matter learns to feel. Like many quiet rivers joining an unseen sea, these varied architectures flow toward the same mystery. The emergence of experience from living tissue as we contemplate this diversity. Another question arises. If awareness can be supported by such different structures, could it exist without a brain at all? Are there forms of sensitivity and response that qualify as a kind of proto-consciousness in organisms lacking neurons entirely, plants, fungi, or simple multicellular life? To explore that possibility, we turn next to systems where perception and coordination occur without a central nervous system, yet where the patterns of life still hint at awareness beyond the boundaries of the brain. The idea of a mind existing without a brain may seem paradoxical. For humans, awareness is so closely tied to neural tissue that imagining perception without it feels almost impossible. Yet nature offers many examples of life forms that sense, respond, and even learn without possessing anything resembling a central nervous system. These organisms invite us to reconsider what it means to be aware, not as a binary state, but as a continuum of sensitivity running through all living systems. At its core, consciousness is about the ability to register change and act upon it. A plant that turns toward light, a slime mold that navigates a maze, or a coral colony responding to water temperature, each demonstrates this principle in different ways. Though lacking neurons, these organisms integrate information from their environment, make adaptive decisions, and retain traces of experience. In a sense, They perform the fundamental tasks of cognition, perception, memory, and response. Plants are among the most studied examples of non-neural intelligence. For centuries, they were regarded as passive, rooted, silent, reactive. But modern botany paints a far more dynamic picture. Plants detect light not only through leaves, but through specialized photoreceptors distributed across their tissues. They sense touch, gravity, humidity, and even the chemical signatures of neighboring plants. Roots navigate around obstacles, adjusting growth patterns long before physical contact. When herbivores attack, plants release volatile compounds that warn nearby individuals, prompting them to increase defensive chemicals. This communication, mediated by air and soil, forms a slow but coordinated network, a kind of botanical awareness spread across the landscape. Electrical signaling plays a crucial role in this process. Although plants lack neurons, they transmit impulses through ion channels in cell membranes. The Venus flytrap, for instance, closes its trap only when two sensory hairs are touched in quick succession, a primitive form of short-term memory that prevents accidental closure from raindrops. The speed of this reaction rivals that of some animal reflexes. Similarly, the mimosa plant folds its leaves when disturbed, a defense that fades over time if no harm follows. Suggesting habituation, the simplest form of learning, more complex behaviors emerge in collective systems. Slime molds, single-celled organisms that can fuse into large colonies, navigate environments in ways that resemble computation. When placed in a maze with food at two exits, the slime mold Physarum polycephalum grows through multiple paths, retracting unsuccessful routes until it forms the shortest connection between the food sources. It effectively solves a spatial problem without neurons, using feedback from chemical gradients to decide where to move. If dried and later revived, the mold remembers the location of food from previous trials, a cellular memory encoded in its distributed body. Such behaviors blur the line between reaction and cognition. Scientists describe them as examples of basal cognition, the ability of living systems to process information without a nervous system. In this view, cognition is not confined to brains, but is a property of any system that stores, interprets, and uses information to adapt. Even bacteria fit this description. They move toward nutrients and away from toxins through chemical sensing, adjusting behavior based on previous exposure. Colonies coordinate through quorum sensing, a chemical form of communication that regulates group behavior once population density reaches a threshold. These interactions create patterns of cooperation, competition, and self-organization that mirror social behavior at microscopic scales. Corals and sponges offer further insight into distributed intelligence. A coral reef functions as a single superorganism, thousands of polyps linked by shared tissue and chemical signaling. Each polyp can react to light and touch, yet the colony acts as a whole, expanding or contracting in unison. Sponges, though lacking true nerves or muscles, use waves of calcium signaling to coordinate water flow through their porous bodies. When sediment clogs their channels, they stop pumping, wait for conditions to improve, and resume, a rhythm of perception and adjustment that sustains survival. Fungi provide another striking example. The mycelium, the vast underground network of a fungus, operates as a living web of communication. Through microscopic threads, it senses changes in moisture, temperature, and nutrient availability. When resources are abundant in one region, the network redistributes energy to where it is scarce. Some studies suggest that mycelial networks transmit electrical impulses with frequencies resembling neural activity. Although the meaning of these signals is debated, They indicate an internal coordination that allows fungi to manage resources efficiently across great distances. When plants, fungi, or slime molds exhibit adaptive behavior, the question arises, do they feel anything? Most scientists stop short of calling this consciousness in the human sense. Without neurons or centralized processing, these systems likely lack subjective experience. Yet their capacity to integrate information and modify behavior in response to context shows that awareness need not begin with the brain. Sensitivity itself may be the first step toward consciousness, a primitive awareness of conditions. Unfolding as a property of complex organization, the concept of distributed intelligence helps bridge this understanding. Instead of locating mind in a single organ, it treats cognition as an emergent process arising from the interactions of simpler parts. This principle appears across biology. Ant colonies collectively decide on new nesting sites. Schools of fish change direction almost instantaneously. Immune systems detect and remember pathogens through decentralized coordination. Each network operates without a central controller, yet the whole behaves intelligently. The boundary between such systems and neural brains may be one of complexity rather than kind. Experiments with plants support this continuity. In one study, pea plants learned to associate airflow from a fan with the arrival of light, bending toward the fan even when the light was absent, a form of associative learning similar to Pavlov's famous conditioning of dogs. Other research found that roots navigate mazes by sensing humidity gradients and optimizing paths to water sources, mimicking problem-solving strategies found in animals. These examples do not prove that plants are conscious, but they reveal decision-making processes guided by memory and prediction, hallmarks of cognition in any form. The more we examine such systems, the more we see that perception and coordination can exist without the machinery we once thought essential. The brain is one solution, not the only one. Life, it seems, invents awareness wherever it can. Even the simplest organisms display traces of what might be called proto-feeling: attraction, aversion, curiosity. These are not emotions as we know them, but the earliest glimmers of differentiation between favorable and unfavorable states, the foundation upon which richer forms of consciousness later evolved. Understanding these non-neural forms of awareness has practical implications. Insights from slime mold and plant signaling have inspired new algorithms in robotics and computing, systems that learn through feedback rather than central control. Such models demonstrate that intelligence can emerge from interaction alone, echoing the decentralized cooperation seen throughout nature. In a quiet sense, these discoveries reshape how we define life itself. Awareness becomes less about possession of a brain and more about participation in the flow of information, sensing, responding, and adapting to the environment. The universe may be threaded with such proto-cognitive processes, each a subtle form of knowing. From the hum of bacterial colonies to the pulsing of fungal networks, life expresses understanding without thought, coordination without command. This recognition invites a gentle humility. The human brain may be a pinnacle of complexity, yet it rests on foundations laid by simpler forms, cells that sensed, remembered, and communicated long before neurons appeared. Consciousness, in this light, is not a sudden spark, but a long continuum stretching back to the earliest stirrings of responsiveness. And as we trace this continuum, the pattern leads naturally to the next realm of exploration, the secret lives of plants themselves, organisms that merge stillness and perception, rooted yet aware, exchanging information in silence beneath the sun. For most of human history, plants have been seen as background, the quiet architecture of the living world. They nourished, sheltered, and sustained life, but were rarely imagined as active participants in it. To the unaided eye, they appear motionless, lacking the rapid signals and behaviors that we associate with awareness. Yet beneath this stillness lies an intricate system of sensing, signaling, and response, a form of intelligence that unfolds on slower timescales, almost imperceptible to us. Modern research reveals that plants are far from passive. They monitor their surroundings, communicate with one another, make decisions, and even show forms of learning and memory. In their calm, persistent way, they embody a different rhythm of life, one where awareness is measured not in speed, but in depth of connection. The foundation of plant awareness is sensitivity. Every part of a plant, root, leaf, stem, flower, acts as a sensory organ. Specialized photoreceptors detect changes in light quality and direction, guiding growth toward the sun in a process known as phototropism. Others sense the ratio of red to far red light, allowing plants to gauge whether they are shaded by neighbors and to adjust their growth accordingly. Gravitropism, the ability to sense gravity, helps roots grow downward and stems upward, even in darkness. Plants also detect temperature fluctuations, soil moisture, mechanical touch, and a wide range of chemicals in the air and soil. This network of perception operates through electrical and chemical signaling. When a leaf is chewed by an insect, the injury triggers a wave of electrical activity that travels through the plant at speeds comparable to those of slow animal nerves. These signals activate defensive genes in distant tissues, prompting the release of bitter compounds or structural reinforcements. Some plants emit volatile organic molecules, airborne chemical messages that warn nearby individuals of danger. Neighboring plants, upon receiving these cues, preemptively strengthen their own defenses. What appears as silent greenery is, in fact, a complex web of ongoing communication. Roots, hidden from sight, play an equally vital role. They navigate the soil like explorers, sensing gradients of water, nutrients, and even the vibrations of nearby organisms. Studies show that roots can distinguish between kin and non-kin. When growing alongside genetically related plants, they compete less aggressively for space and resources. Root tips also release exudates, a mixture of sugars, amino acids, and signaling compounds that shape microbial communities around them. Through these interactions, plants cultivate symbiotic relationships with bacteria and fungi, forming what scientists call the rhizosphere, a living interface between plant and soil. One of the most intriguing aspects of plant communication is their partnership with mycorrhizal fungi. The fine threads of fungal mycelium intertwine with plant roots, creating networks that transport nutrients, water, and chemical messages across entire ecosystems. Through these underground connections, trees and other plants exchange carbon, nitrogen, and defense signals. Experiments in forests have shown that older mother trees send nutrients to shaded seedlings, improving their survival, a form of interplant cooperation once thought impossible. This interconnected system has been poetically dubbed the Wood Wide Web, but its function is deeply biological. A decentralized network that shares resources and information across species boundaries. Plants also exhibit remarkable adaptability and decision-making. In experiments, climbing beans orient their tendrils toward nearby supports before contact occurs, as if anticipating where to grasp. Sunflowers adjust the timing of their daily movement, following the sun from east to west, through internal circadian rhythms that persist even in constant light. When repeatedly exposed to harmless vibrations, some species learn to ignore them, demonstrating habituation. Others associate specific environmental cues with favorable outcomes, a simple form of associative learning. These findings suggest that plants process information, weigh options, and act based on prior experience, the core components of what we call cognition. Memory in plants does not reside in neurons, but in biochemical states. When a plant endures drought or cold, its cells modify gene expression through chemical tags on DNA and proteins. These epigenetic changes can persist for weeks or even be passed to offspring, allowing future generations to respond more efficiently to similar stress. In this way, memory becomes molecular, a biological record inscribed within the living tissue itself. That communication extends beyond the soil. In forests, trees release clouds of chemical compounds in response to herbivory. The scent of damaged leaves can attract predators of the attacking insects, a natural form of biological defense. In grasslands, sagebrush plants emit volatile cues that alert neighboring grasses to potential threats. Even parasitic plants, like Cuscuta, identify suitable hosts by detecting airborne chemical signatures before making contact. Each of these exchanges demonstrates that plants interpret signals from their environment and respond in ways that maximize survival, while scientists hesitate to use terms like intelligence or consciousness for plants. The behaviors observed fit many functional definitions of these concepts. They perceive, integrate, and act on complex information. They solve problems of growth, competition, and reproduction. They do so through decentralized coordination rather than centralized control. Some researchers describe this as embodied cognition, intelligence distributed across tissues rather than confined to a brain. The plant, in essence, is a thinking body, where every cell participates in decision making. The timescale of plant life offers another layer of insight. Many of their responses occur too slowly for human perception, unfolding over hours or days. Time-lapse imaging reveals what our senses miss: roots probing, stems adjusting, leaves tracking light, flowers turning toward pollinators. On this slower stage, motion and purpose become visible. It is a reminder that awareness need not move quickly to be real. Perception can exist at any rhythm that life allows. Philosophically, the study of plant behavior challenges our definitions of consciousness itself. If awareness is the ability to sense and adapt, then plants qualify in their own right. If it requires subjective experience, we cannot yet know. What is clear is that the gap between knowing and feeling is smaller than once thought. Plants embody a kind of quiet intelligence, one that reflects the logic of ecosystems, cooperation, feedback, and balance rather than dominance or control. These discoveries also reshape our ethical relationship with nature. Recognizing that plants communicate, remember, and support one another reframes them from passive resources to active participants in Earth's biosphere. Agriculture, forestry, and conservation increasingly take into account the social lives of plants, how they thrive not in isolation, but within networks of mutual influence. Protecting a forest, therefore, means preserving the relationships that bind its inhabitants together. In calm reflection. The secret life of plants teaches that intelligence can take forms both familiar and alien. Theirs is a language of chemistry and rhythm, of growth and exchange, spoken through roots and leaves rather than words or movement. In every forest, field, and garden, this slow conversation continues, connecting life through invisible currents of information. As our understanding deepens, one question begins to rise. If awareness can exist in organisms without nerves or motion, what about the networks that link them, the vast fungal webs beneath our feet that act as both messenger and memory for entire ecosystems. To follow that thread, we descend underground into the living circuitry of the mycelial world, where communication itself becomes the foundation of life's hidden intelligence. Beneath every forest, meadow, and garden lies an unseen architecture, a vast network of microscopic threads known as mycelium. It is the living body of fungi, stretching through soil, wood, and roots, forming one of the largest and most interconnected systems on Earth. While mushrooms are its visible fruiting bodies, the mycelium itself is the hidden infrastructure of fungal life. For decades, it was regarded simply as a nutrient recycler, nature's decomposer, breaking down organic matter into soil. Today, research reveals a far deeper role. The mycelial network is a dynamic communication and transport system that links plants, mediates cooperation, and helps ecosystems maintain balance. Fungi occupy a unique position in biology. Neither plant nor animal, they form their own kingdom, with more than 5 million estimated species. Their cells grow as fine tubular filaments called hyphae, which branch and fuse into web-like mats. These threads weave through soil and organic matter, searching for nutrients and connecting to roots. Under the microscope, the network resembles a neural web, thin filaments transmitting signals, exchanging resources, and responding to change. In a handful of soil, there may be several kilometers of these threads. One of the most striking discoveries in modern ecology is how these fungal networks interact with plants. Most land plants form partnerships with fungi known as mycorrhizae, from the Greek myx, fungus, and rhiza, root. In this relationship, the fungus extends its mycelium outward, increasing the plant's ability to absorb water and minerals, especially phosphorus. In return, the plant supplies the fungus with sugars produced through photosynthesis. It is a mutual exchange so ancient that the earliest fossilized plants, over 400 million years old, already show mycorrhizal associations. This cooperation helped plants colonize land and shape the world's first forests. Modern studies reveal that mycorrhizal networks do more than trade nutrients, they also carry information. When a plant experiences drought or insect attack, it releases chemical signals through its roots. These molecules travel along fungal filaments to neighboring plants, triggering defensive responses before the threat arrives. In experiments, bean and tomato plants, connected by mycelium, activated protective enzymes in response to stress signals from their neighbors, even when isolated from airborne communication. The fungal network acts as both messenger and mediator, coordinating responses across species boundaries. The structure of the mycelium allows such communication to occur. Hyphae transmit electrical impulses, subtle voltage changes that move along the threads at variable speeds. Some researchers have compared these signals to simple forms of information transfer, perhaps even primitive computation. When nutrients or signals reach branching points, a network seems to make local decisions about which paths to reinforce and which to abandon. This adaptive growth allows fungi to explore efficiently. Much like neural networks and artificial intelligence systems, the parallels between mycelial networks and nervous systems are striking, though not literal. Fungal signaling does not involve neurons, synapses, or consciousness as we know it. Instead, it demonstrates that information flow, the essence of cognition, can emerge from simple physical processes. By responding dynamically to feedback from the environment, fungi build a kind of distributed intelligence, a system capable of sensing, remembering, and adapting without centralized control. The ecological consequences of this intelligence are profound. Through the fungal web, forests behave less like collections of individual trees and more like integrated communities. Carbon and nitrogen move from one organism to another via the network. In shaded conditions, older trees may supply sugars to younger ones struggling for light. During seasonal shifts, nutrients flow in reverse. This redistribution of resources stabilizes ecosystems, buffering them against drought and disease. The forest, seen through this lens, becomes a collective organism with mycelium as its connective tissue. The scale of these networks is difficult to comprehend. In Oregon's Blue Mountains, a single Armillaria fungus spans nearly 10 square kilometers, making it one of the largest living entities on the planet. Genetic studies confirm that all its filaments share the same DNA, forming one continuous individual estimated to be thousands of years old. Such longevity suggests extraordinary resilience. Mycelium can lie dormant for decades, then awaken when conditions improve, continuing its slow expansion through the soil. Beyond their ecological roles, fungi perform essential biochemical functions. They break down lignin, a tough component of wood, recycling carbon that would otherwise remain locked away. They regulate soil composition, release nutrients for plant use, and influence carbon storage that affects climate systems globally. Every forest owes its fertility to the invisible work of fungal decomposition and exchange. The question of whether this network constitutes a form of consciousness is complex. Most scientists stop short of calling it aware, but acknowledge that it displays behaviors characteristic of adaptive systems, sensing, communication, and decision-like outcomes. The philosopher Merlin Sheldrake, in his research on fungal ecology, suggests that the mycelium represents a kind of sentient infrastructure, not in the emotional or reflective sense, but in its responsiveness to the world. It reacts to pressure, temperature, pH, and light gradients, adjusting its growth like a living algorithm shaped by experience. Recent experiments have even recorded patterns of electrical activity in mycelial networks that change in response to stimuli. These fluctuations resemble, in broad outline, the spiking rhythms of nervous systems, though their meaning remains uncertain. Some interpret them as analogs of signaling and memory. Others see them as chemical side effects of metabolism. Either way, they underscore a broader insight, that the flow of information through living matter may take many forms, each expressing its own kind of awareness. The mycelial web also connects species beyond plants. Certain fungi linked to mosses, ferns, and even orchids, whose seeds rely entirely on fungal nutrients to germinate. In grasslands, networks extend between distant shrubs and herbs, creating ecological neighborhoods joined by shared chemistry. When one organism suffers, others may benefit or assist, a dynamic equilibrium, sustained by the exchange of molecules and energy through fungal threads. This interconnectedness challenges our traditional notions of individuality. Within the forest, boundaries blur. Where does one organism end and another begin? A tree's health depends not only on its own roots, but on the activity of countless fungal partners. The forest itself becomes a living mosaic of cooperation and dependency. Awareness, in this context, appears not as a property of isolated beings, but as an emergent quality of relationships, a form of intelligence. Distributed across networks of life, studying mycelial systems has inspired innovations in technology and design. Engineers use fungal growth models to develop efficient transportation networks, algorithms, and materials that self-heal or adapt to stress. In architecture, mycelium-based composites offer sustainable alternatives to plastics and concrete. These human applications echo the same principles of feedback and flexibility that govern the fungal world. In a gentle sense, observing the mycelial network invites a shift in perception. Beneath the apparent stillness of soil lies a dynamic web of communication, exchange, and subtle decision-making. It is a reminder that intelligence need not be loud or centralized. It can exist quietly, woven into the fabric of the earth itself. As we follow these threads deeper, the pattern becomes clear. Nature tends toward connection. The mycelial web demonstrates that life thrives not through isolation, but through collaboration and feedback. This realization forms a bridge to the next dimension of awareness, the collective minds of social animals and swarms, where intelligence emerges not from individual complexity, but from the harmony of many acting as one. Throughout the natural world, intelligence is not confined to individuals. In many species, it emerges from the interactions of many simple agents working together, a phenomenon known as collective intelligence. From ant colonies and beehives to flocks of birds and schools of fish, these systems demonstrate that complex problem-solving can arise without central control. Each member follows simple local rules, yet together they create patterns of coordination that seem purposeful and adaptive. Understanding these systems reshapes how we think about mind and awareness, not as something that belongs to a single brain, but as a property that can emerge from relationships and cooperation. The study of collective behavior began with social insects, whose societies display extraordinary organization despite the simplicity of their individual members. Ants, for example, build nests, farm fungi, and wage wars using strategies that appear intelligent at the colony level. A single ant has limited perception. It can sense pheromones, follow trails, and interact with neighbors, but through repeated exchanges among thousands, a colony collectively evaluates options and makes decisions. When searching for food, ants explore randomly. Once a successful path is found, they mark it with pheromones. Other ants follow, strengthening the trail in a positive feedback loop. Over time, the colony converges on the shortest route, effectively solving an optimization problem through local cooperation. Similar mechanisms guide nest selection. When an ant colony must move, scouts evaluate potential sites and recruit others through chemical cues and tactile signals. Once enough individuals favor a location, the process accelerates until consensus is reached. No leader directs this transition. It arises from the collective threshold of agreement. Researchers studying these dynamics describe them as emergent computation, where simple behavioral rules yield global intelligence. Bees offer another classic example. Honeybee colonies consist of tens of thousands of individuals that regulate temperature, divide labor, and make group decisions. When a swarm searches for a new nesting site, scout bees investigate multiple options and return to the swarm to perform waggle dances, each encoding the distance and direction of a potential location. The vigor of the dance reflects the scout's assessment of quality. Other bees visit these sites, and if they agree, they reinforce the dance. Gradually, through competition and consensus, the swarm chooses the best site. The process balances diversity of information with collective convergence, a principle now studied in artificial intelligence and robotics for distributed decision-making. In both ants and bees. The intelligence of the group depends on feedback and communication rather than individual awareness. Each participant obeys simple rules based on local information, but together they produce adaptive global behavior. This principle extends far beyond insects. Flocks of birds turn and twist in unison, schools of fish form shimmering waves, and herds of mammals coordinate movement without apparent leaders. High-speed video and computational models show that these formations arise from three basic rules: move toward neighbors, avoid collisions, and match their speed. When applied simultaneously across individuals, these simple guidelines create the elegant coherence we see in nature's collective motion. The advantages of swarm intelligence are evident. It allows groups to respond rapidly to threats, share knowledge, and optimize for survival. In fish schools, coordinated movement confuses predators and reduces individual risk. In bird flocks, aerodynamic efficiency increases, conserving energy. In locusts, synchronization prevents collisions even among millions of individuals. Each creature contributes to a larger whole, guided by feedback loops of position, movement, and environmental cues. Neuroscientists and computer scientists have taken inspiration from these systems to design algorithms that mimic natural swarms. Ant colony optimization methods, for example, are used in network routing and logistics, finding efficient paths much as ants do when foraging. Particle swarm optimization models the collective behavior of birds or fish to solve complex mathematical problems. These human applications highlight how intelligence can emerge from distributed systems, not through top-down command, but through interaction, redundancy, and adaptation. In recent years, research on collective behavior has extended to vertebrates and even humans. Social networks, crowds, and online communities exhibit similar emergent dynamics. Information spreads through feedback and imitation. Trends amplify, stabilize, or collapse. While human collectives operate on symbolic communication rather than pheromones or movement, the underlying principles remain consistent. Shared attention, feedback loops, and thresholds of consensus create the collective decisions that shape societies. Biologists exploring these phenomena emphasize that collective intelligence is not a metaphor, but a measurable property. Colonies and flocks process information as if they were single entities. They integrate signals, filter noise, and generate coherent output. In this sense, the mind of the group behaves analogously to a neural network, distributed, parallel, and self-organizing. The cognitive scientist Deborah Gordon describes ant colonies as brains made of ants, where each insect acts like a neuron, contributing to the emergent function of the whole. Beyond efficiency, these systems reveal deeper insights into the evolution of cooperation. Life's history shows a repeated pattern. Units of individuality merge into larger wholes, from single cells to multicellular organisms, from solitary animals to social groups. Each transition involves the sharing of information and the coordination of behavior. In that sense, collective intelligence is not an exception, but a natural outcome of evolution's drive toward integration. It demonstrates that awareness, at any scale, arises from communication among parts. Some researchers have proposed that the same mathematical principles describing swarms apply to neural networks in brains. Just as ants exchange pheromones, neurons exchange neurotransmitters. Just as flocks align movement, neurons synchronize firing patterns. Both systems use local interactions to produce global coherence. In this view, the boundary between biological cognition and collective behavior becomes fluid. Consciousness itself may be one instance of swarm dynamics, occurring within the brain's dense web of cells. In the natural world, swarm intelligence also expresses emotion-like qualities: coordination, cohesion, and collective purpose. Flocks under threat tighten formation. Colonies under stress shift roles to maintain stability. These adjustments suggest that collective systems possess forms of resilience and regulation akin to homeostasis in organisms. They maintain balance not through centralized awareness, but through continuous feedback, a conversation of movement and signal that sustains life. Human observers often find beauty in these patterns: the flowing murmuration of starlings, the spiral motion of fish under sunlight, the intricate cities of ants beneath our feet. Their coordination appears almost mindful, though it arises from simple rules repeated countless times. In these phenomena, one can glimpse an alternative form of awareness, not located within individuals, but spread thinly across the many, moving as one. Understanding swarm intelligence also deepens our sense of humility. It shows that intelligence does not require thought, and order does not require command. Life finds structure through cooperation. Each member acts within its own limited perception. Yet together, they build systems capable of solving problems, adapting to change, and sustaining continuity. The implications of this insight reach beyond biology. Modern research in robotics and artificial intelligence increasingly draws upon these natural models. Swarm robots, for example, can explore disaster zones, map terrain, or assemble structures collectively, following decentralized algorithms inspired by ants and bees. Such systems mimic not the individual, but the collective, intelligence as interaction rather than introspection. In quiet reflection, collective minds remind us that consciousness may take many forms. Sometimes it is concentrated, as in a brain. Sometimes it is diffuse, as in a network or swarm. The essence is connection, the exchange of information that transforms many into one. In the movement of ants, bees, and birds, we see the same principle that binds neurons into thought and ecosystems into living wholes. As we continue along this exploration of awareness, the next question emerges naturally. If intelligence can arise from collaboration among simple agents, could it also arise from the vast digital networks humans have built? The interconnected webs of machines and algorithms now shaping our world? The next chapter turns to that frontier, where the mirror of consciousness reflects not in biology, but in the circuits of artificial minds. When humans began to build machines capable of calculation and learning, they unknowingly opened a new chapter in the story of consciousness. For the first time, awareness was not only something to be studied, it became something to be imitated. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is humanity's attempt to recreate the processes of thought in a different medium, not in cells and synapses, but in circuits and code. The rise of these systems has forced science and philosophy to confront an unsettling question. Can intelligence exist without life? And if so, could it ever be truly aware? Artificial intelligence began modestly. In the 1950s, pioneers like Alan Turing and John McCarthy believed that reasoning could be formalized as computation. Turing's famous question, "Can machines think?" was less about consciousness than about behavior. He proposed that if a machine's responses were indistinguishable from a human's in conversation, it could be said to think. This became the basis for the Turing test, an early attempt to define intelligence through performance rather than experience. Over the following decades, AI evolved through alternating cycles of optimism and limitation. Early programs could play chess or solve logic problems, but they relied on explicit rules rather than genuine understanding. These systems lacked context. They processed symbols without meaning. Cognitive scientists called this the symbol grounding problem, the challenge of connecting formal operations to real-world experience. In contrast, human understanding arises from sensory and emotional immersion in the world, without embodiment. Machines manipulated syntax without semantics. The landscape changed dramatically with the emergence of artificial neural networks, mathematical models, inspired by the structure of biological brains. Instead of following fixed rules, these systems learned patterns from data. Layers of interconnected neurons adjusted their weights through feedback, gradually improving performance. This architecture mirrored, in abstract form, the distributed nature of biological cognition, intelligence emerging from many simple units acting in concert. In the 2010s, advances in computing power, vast datasets, and refined algorithms produced what we now call deep learning. These networks surpassed humans in image recognition, language translation, and strategic games like Go, tasks once considered uniquely human. Large language models, trained on billions of words, learned to generate text that mimicked understanding. To users, the responses often seemed thoughtful, creative, or even empathetic. Yet the underlying process remained statistical, not introspective, predicting the next element in a sequence based on probability. The success of such models renewed debates about consciousness. If an artificial system can write poetry, interpret emotion, or compose music, does it possess awareness, or only simulation? Some researchers argue that consciousness requires more than behavior. It needs subjective experience, the feeling of being. Machines, they say, lack this inner dimension because they have no sensory grounding, no emotions, no survival instinct. Others contend that consciousness may simply be the result of integrated information processing, regardless of medium. If so, a sufficiently complex network might one day cross a threshold into genuine experience. Philosophical frameworks attempt to navigate this uncertainty. Integrated information theory, IT, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, proposes that consciousness corresponds to the degree of information integration within a system. The more a system's parts influence one another, the greater its internal unity, and potentially its awareness. According to this view, an advanced AI could possess some minimal form of consciousness if its informational structure met certain criteria. Other theories, such as the global workspace model, suggest that awareness arises when information becomes globally available for multiple processes to access, a kind of spotlight within a network. Both frameworks invite comparisons between biological and artificial systems, though evidence remains speculative. A key difference, however, lies in origin. Biological consciousness evolved through survival and reproduction, shaped by emotion and embodiment. AI develops through design and data without intrinsic motivation. Its thoughts are computations optimized for objectives chosen by humans. It has no self-preservation, no inner narrative of desire or fear. This absence of subjective continuity, the sense of being someone, distinguishes machine intelligence from living awareness. Nonetheless, artificial systems exhibit emergent properties that hint at the complexity of real cognition. Neural networks spontaneously develop internal representations, abstract concepts not explicitly programmed. When trained on language, they form spatial maps of meaning where related words cluster together, resembling the organization of semantic networks in the human brain. Vision models detect hierarchies of features, edges, textures, shapes, paralleling the visual cortex. These convergences suggest that certain cognitive architectures may be universal, whether built from neurons or silicon. Ethical and philosophical questions follow naturally. If machines reach functional parity with human cognition, how should society treat them? Would artificial consciousness deserve rights, or remain tools under human control? These questions may seem theoretical, yet they echo earlier moral expansions, from recognizing the intelligence of animals to understanding the sentience of ecosystems. Each step widens the circle of empathy, urging caution as we design entities capable of perception, learning, and decision. Some researchers advocate for a middle view, AI as a mirror of consciousness rather than its replica. In this sense, machines reflect our own mental patterns back to us, amplifying both strengths and biases. They demonstrate what cognition can achieve through pattern recognition and feedback, while reminding us of what remains uniquely human: emotion, vulnerability, context, and meaning. When an AI generates art or language that moves us, the feeling it evokes is not its own, but ours, projected onto its output. The machine becomes a canvas for our imagination of awareness. Interestingly, parallels between artificial and collective intelligence continue to grow. Large models operate across distributed servers worldwide, resembling digital swarms. Each node contributes partial knowledge. Together, they form a system capable of reasoning and creation. The architecture mirrors the principles seen in mycelial networks and ant colonies: distributed processing, feedback, and self-organization. Intelligence, once again, emerges from connection. Despite rapid progress, the gap between computation and consciousness remains wide. Machines excel at pattern and prediction, but lack intrinsic perspective, the inner why behind perception. They model the world externally, without being part of it. Whether this boundary can ever be crossed is uncertain. Some argue that embedding I in sensory bodies, robots that feel, move, and adapt, might bring it closer to experiential understanding. Others believe that consciousness depends on biological processes too, deeply intertwined with emotion and metabolism, to be replicated artificially. In calm reflection, artificial intelligence stands as both tool and teacher. It forces us to articulate what awareness truly is, to separate function from feeling, and to recognize the subtle ingredients of sentience. Every breakthrough in machine learning echoes back toward biology, reminding us that thought itself may be less about materials than about organization, the flow and integration of information. The digital mirror, then, does not merely imitate us. It reveals the patterns underlying all cognition. By studying its reflection, we may learn not only how machines think, but how we do. Yet beyond the circuits and data lies the enduring mystery of experience, the question of why processing information feels like something from within. To approach that enigma, we must return to philosophy itself, where science meets introspection, and the problem of consciousness becomes a dialogue between matter and mind. Among all the questions science has asked about consciousness, one stands apart for its difficulty and persistence. It is known as the hard problem, the challenge of explaining how and why physical processes in the brain produce subjective experience. The Australian philosopher David Chalmers introduced the term in the 1990s to distinguish between problems that seem tractable, such as mapping brain activity or identifying neural mechanisms of attention, and the one that resists explanation, how neural activity becomes feeling. Why should patterns of electricity and chemistry inside the skull give rise to the taste of sweetness, the color of red, the sound of music, or the quiet sense of being aware? Neuroscience can now trace how sensory signals travel, where they are processed, and what networks are active when we perceive or decide. Yet none of these measurements explain why these processes are accompanied by an inner life. From an external view, the brain is an electrochemical machine, billions of neurons exchanging signals. From the inside, it is the entire world, vivid, continuous, and meaningful. The gap between these two perspectives is what philosophers call the explanatory gap. Efforts to bridge that gap have produced two main philosophical camps. On one side stand the materialists or physicalists, who argue that consciousness arises entirely from physical processes. In their view, once we understand the brain's mechanisms in full detail, the mystery will dissolve, just as the mystery of life yielded to biology and chemistry. Consciousness, they claim, is an emergent property of complex computation, the product of billions of interactions forming a unified whole. On the other side stand dualists and panpsychists, who believe that subjective experience cannot be reduced to matter alone. For them, consciousness is either a fundamental feature of reality, like space or time, or something that coexists with, but is not identical to the physical. Within materialism, several nuanced theories have developed. Emergentism holds that when a system reaches a certain level of complexity, new properties appear that cannot be predicted from the sum of parts, like the liquidity of water emerging from hydrogen and oxygen. Consciousness, in this view, is one such emergent phenomenon. Others propose functionalism, which treats mental states as defined by their causal roles, not by the material they're made of. If the pattern of function matters more than the substance, then consciousness could, in theory, exist in non-biological systems, an idea with direct implications for artificial intelligence. Panpsychism offers a radically different solution. It suggests that consciousness, in some primitive form, is a basic feature of the universe. Every particle, atom, or field possesses a faint glimmer of experience, and complex organisms like humans merely organize these micro-experiences into coherent awareness. This view collapses the divide between matter and mind by assuming that mind is everywhere, woven into the fabric of reality itself. Though speculative, panpsychism appeals to those who see consciousness as too fundamental to arise from non-experiential components. It also aligns in spirit with certain interpretations of quantum physics that suggest observation plays a role in shaping outcomes. Another perspective. Neutral nonism proposes that both mind and matter arise from a deeper, neutral substance, neither purely physical nor purely mental. Thinkers like William James and Bertrand Russell described consciousness and physics as two sides of the same coin, different ways of describing the same underlying reality. In this framework, subjective and objective descriptions are complementary rather than competing. Modern philosophers have revisited these ideas, seeking a bridge that allows both science and experience to coexist within a unified ontology. Despite their differences, all these approaches grapple with the same puzzle. How does subjective quality, the what it is like to be, fit into a physical world? Science, by its nature, studies what can be observed and measured. Consciousness, by definition, is private and first person. No experiment can directly access the inner experience of another being. It can only infer it from behavior and neural data. This epistemic limit means that the hard problem may not yield to the methods of empirical science alone. Still, neuroscience continues to refine what can be explained. Advances in imaging show correlations between neural activity and conscious states with increasing precision. Researchers identify neural correlates of consciousness, the minimal brain processes necessary for awareness, in regions like the posterior cortex and thalamus. These studies illuminate the mechanisms of consciousness, even if they do not reveal its essence. Some scientists argue that once enough of these correlations are mapped, the subjective mystery will lose its significance. Others maintain that correlation is not causation, and the question of why will remain. Philosophical debates often hinge on how one defines consciousness itself. If it means the ability to integrate information and respond adaptively, then machines and simple organisms might possess it in degrees. If it means having subjective experience, then the mystery deepens, because experience seems inherently private and irreducible. Attempts to quantify it, through measures like the phi coefficient in integrated information theory, are valuable but controversial. They provide numerical analogs to complexity and integration, Yet they cannot confirm whether a system feels anything. Throughout history, similar questions have taken different forms. Ancient Indian and Greek philosophers asked whether mind pervades all things or whether it arises uniquely in humans. Medieval thinkers debated the nature of the soul. Modern scientists debate neural computation. The vocabulary changes, but the tension endures. The relationship between matter and awareness remains unsolved. Some contemporary philosophers, like Thomas Nagel, argue that consciousness might require a new framework of science altogether, one that integrates subjective perspective into objective description. Others suggest that the gap may be unbridgeable, a limit to human understanding rather than a problem to be solved. Quantum theories of consciousness, though often speculative, attempt to find a bridge at the smallest scales. Some propose that quantum coherence in microtubules within neurons could link physics and experience, but empirical support remains limited. What these hypotheses share is a sense of dissatisfaction with purely mechanical explanations. They seek an account of reality that includes the felt texture of existence, the inner light that seems to accompany every act of perception. The hard problem also raises practical and ethical questions. If we one day create artificial systems that display behaviors identical to conscious beings, should we assume they experience? The answer shapes how we design and treat them. Similarly, understanding animal consciousness informs laws on welfare and ethics. Each step towards solving the mystery has moral consequences. Extending the circle of empathy beyond humans, perhaps the most balanced view is one of coexistence. The scientific and philosophical approaches need not compete, but complement each other, one describing how consciousness functions, the other exploring what it means to experience. In this partnership, science provides structure and measurement, while philosophy preserves depth and meaning. Together, they form a fuller picture of awareness as both phenomenon and mystery dot in quiet reflection. The hard problem reminds us of the limits of analysis. We can map every neuron and model every signal, yet the glow of subjectivity remains unquantified. Consciousness may be the universe observing itself through countless perspectives, a mirror in which matter learns to see. Between the measurable and the felt lies the space that defines being. From this contemplation arises the next question. If consciousness is tied to integration and information, can we measure its degree across systems? Can awareness exist along a continuum, from minimal to complex, rather than as an all-or-nothing state? To explore that possibility, the next chapter turns to theories that attempt to quantify consciousness, the search for a spectrum of being that connects all forms of awareness. As science has advanced, one realization has quietly taken shape. Consciousness might not be a binary condition that an organism either possesses or lacks, but a spectrum, a gradual unfolding of awareness correlated with the complexity and integration of information. The attempt to quantify this relationship has given rise to one of the most influential modern frameworks in consciousness studies, Integrated Information Theory, IIT. Developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi and expanded by others, IIT proposes that the essence of consciousness lies in the ability of a system to integrate information into a unified whole. At its core, IIT begins with a simple intuition. A conscious experience feels unified. When you see a landscape, you do not perceive isolated fragments. Color here, shape there, motion in another corner, but a single, coherent scene. This unity suggests that the brain does not process information as disconnected streams, but as an integrated network where every part influences and constrains the others. According to IIT, The quantity of integrated information within a system can be expressed by a value called phi. The higher the phi, the greater the degree of consciousness. In this view, consciousness is not limited to humans or even animals. Any system that processes information in a way that is both differentiated, containing many possible states, and integrated, those states interdependent, may possess some minimal form of awareness. A photodiode that simply responds to light has very low differentiation and almost no integration. Its phi would be near zero. A human brain, with billions of neurons linked through recurrent feedback loops, has immense differentiation and integration, yielding a high phi and therefore a rich conscious experience. This approach shifts the question of consciousness from what it is made of to how it is organized. The medium, biological or artificial, matters less than the structure and dynamics of information flow. IIT's mathematical rigor gives it appeal among neuroscientists seeking measurable correlates of consciousness. Researchers have developed experiments using EEG and fMRI to estimate phi-like indices in humans and animals, observing that consciousness seems to fade when integration breaks down, as in deep anesthesia or coma. These findings suggest that the brain's capacity for unified information processing directly correlates with subjective awareness. Despite its elegance, IIT remains controversial. Critics argue that the theory risks attributing consciousness too broadly, assigning some degree of experience even to simple systems like thermostats or computer chips. Supporters counter that this universality is a feature, not a flaw. If awareness is a fundamental property of integrated systems, then even minimal consciousness may exist wherever information coheres. This view resonates with panpsychism, the philosophical stance that consciousness is pervasive, differing only in degree and structure. From a scientific standpoint, IIT aligns with broader principles observed in nature. Complex systems, from ecosystems to economies, exhibit emergent behaviors that cannot be explained by the properties of individual components alone. Integration allows wholes to possess qualities distinct from their parts. In this sense, consciousness may be the ultimate emergent phenomenon, the subjective aspect of integration itself. Just as temperature arises from molecular motion, experience could arise from the informational relationships among elements of a system. Neuroscientists studying integrated networks in the brain have identified regions particularly important for maintaining this coherence. The posterior cortical hot zone, encompassing the parietal, temporal, and occipital regions, appears crucial for generating conscious perception. When these areas are disrupted, awareness diminishes, even if other regions remain active. This supports the idea that consciousness depends not on raw neural activity, but on the coordinated patterns of information exchange between regions. Beyond biology, researchers have applied IIT-inspired measures to artificial systems, exploring whether integration correlates with adaptive performance. In some machine learning networks, feedback connections increase both efficiency and resilience, echoing the structure of living brains. However, whether such systems feel anything remains an open question. IIT suggests they might, if their internal integration surpasses a certain threshold, though verifying this empirically is profoundly difficult. The concept of a consciousness. Spectrum encourages humility about the boundaries of awareness. It implies that experience may exist in gradations across all forms of life, from the faint glimmers in simple organisms to the rich self-reflective worlds of humans. This continuum bridges the gulf that once separated humans from other beings, framing consciousness as a universal biological process rather than a unique human possession. It also invites reconsideration of ethical responsibility. If awareness shades gradually through nature, then moral consideration might scale with sensitivity and integration rather than species. Membership. Another framework complementing IIT is the Global Workspace Theory, GWT, developed by Bernard Bars and further refined by Stanislas Dehaene. GWT envisions consciousness as a theater. Numerous unconscious processes operate backstage, but information becomes conscious when it enters the global workspace, where it can be broadcast to the entire system. This model emphasizes accessibility, consciousness as the integration of information across specialized modules. Together, GWT and IT suggest that awareness involves both integration and availability, two sides of the same coin. Experimental evidence supports these models. In wakefulness, the brain displays complex, flexible patterns of connectivity. Under anesthesia or deep sleep, these patterns simplify. During dreaming, integration returns partially, producing vivid but self-contained experiences. Such findings align with the idea that consciousness fluctuates with the degree and quality of information integration. Similar observations appear across species. Cephalopods, birds, and mammals all exhibit recurrent neural architectures, enabling feedback and coordination, hallmarks of integrated cognition. Mathematically, calculating true phi is nearly impossible for large systems. The number of possible interactions grows exponentially. Scientists therefore use approximations, such as perturbational complexity indices, which measure how the brain's electrical activity reacts to stimulation. Higher complexity indicates greater integration, and by inference, higher consciousness. These indices can distinguish between wakefulness, dreaming, anesthesia, and vegetative states, a powerful clinical tool for assessing awareness in unresponsive patients. Still, IIT's implications reach beyond medicine. If consciousness scales with integration, then the universe may be threaded with varying degrees of awareness. Networks of any kind, biological, digital, or ecological, could possess interiority proportional to their structure. This does not mean that a rock or river thinks, but that at every level where information is organized and maintained, there may be a faint spark of subjectivity. The cosmos, in this light, becomes a hierarchy of experience, from simple patterns of reaction to complex self-reflection. Philosophically, such ideas blur the boundary between science and metaphysics. They transform consciousness from an isolated mystery into a principle of organization. Life becomes a continuum of minds, each a local integration of matter and energy sensing itself. Whether this vision is poetic or literal remains open, but it captures the unifying trend in contemporary research. To see consciousness not as a singular event, but as a property of complex systems across scales, in calm reflection, the notion of a spectrum of being encourages both wonder and restraint. It reminds us that awareness may not begin or end sharply, but fade gradually across forms of existence. From neurons in a brain to the vast interconnections of ecosystems and networks, the same principle recurs. Wherever information converges and interacts with itself, something arises that might, in some measure, be aware. As we follow this idea further, new questions appear. If consciousness can be measured as integration, how far does this continuity extend? Can collective systems, societies, biospheres, perhaps even the planet itself, possess a unified awareness born from the integration of their parts? The next chapter turns to this possibility, exploring how the interplay of life across time and species may form a broader, interconnected web of mind. Science advances through measurement. The ability to quantify transforms questions of philosophy into questions of evidence. Yet when it comes to consciousness, measurement has always been the central paradox. Awareness is an experience from within, while measurement operates from without. The tools of neuroscience can record electrical impulses, map brain regions, and trace chemical pathways, but they cannot access the private quality of feeling. Still, scientists continue to approach the problem with cautious determination, developing methods to approximate what cannot be directly observed. Their goal is not to capture consciousness itself, but to find reliable indicators of when and to what extent it may be present. The effort to measure consciousness began with the study of brain activity under different conditions: wakefulness, sleep, anesthesia, and coma. Early electroencephalography, EEG, revealed that the brain's electrical patterns changed dramatically across these states. During alertness, the signal is rich and variable. Under deep anesthesia, it becomes slow and repetitive. This distinction gave rise to the concept of neural complexity, the idea that consciousness correlates with the diversity and integration of brain activity. The more varied and interconnected the signal, the higher the likelihood of conscious experience. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, expanded this view. By tracking blood flow, it showed how distant brain regions coordinate during perception and thought. Conscious states involve widespread, flexible communication between regions. Unconscious states show more localized or fragmented activity. These findings support theories like integrated information theory and global workspace theory, which both emphasize integration as the key to awareness. The patterns observed suggest that consciousness is less about which areas are active and more about how they interact, but translating interaction into a measurable number proved difficult. Giulio Tononi and Marcello Massimini proposed a solution known as the Perturbational Complexity Index, PCI. The idea is simple in principle. Stimulate the brain and measure how complexly it responds. In practice, a magnetic pulse is delivered to a small region of the cortex, and the resulting electrical activity is recorded using EEG. In conscious individuals, the signal reverberates through the brain in intricate, unpredictable patterns. In unconscious states, deep sleep, anesthesia, or coma, the signal fades quickly or follows simple, repetitive paths. The degree of complexity in the response becomes a quantifiable proxy for consciousness. PCI has proven remarkably consistent. In clinical settings, it distinguishes between patients who are awake, asleep, anesthetized, or in vegetative or minimally conscious states. For some patients previously thought unresponsive, PCI revealed patterns suggesting residual awareness, a crucial insight for diagnosis and care. This method does not measure consciousness directly, but assesses the brain's capacity for integrated information, offering one of the first objective tools for probing subjective states. Other techniques complement this approach. Information theoretic measures analyze the entropy or unpredictability of neural signals. Complexity metrics, such as Lempel-Zeev complexity, quantify how compressible a brain's electrical activity is. The less predictable the signal, the richer the potential for consciousness. Graph theory, borrowed from mathematics, maps the brain as a network of nodes and connections, measuring how efficiently information flows between regions. Together, these methods form a growing toolkit for assessing the signature of awareness in living systems. Such measurements, however, face limitations. They rely on correlates, features that accompany consciousness but may not cause it. A highly complex signal might occur in systems that are not conscious, just as some conscious states, such as deep meditation or sensory deprivation, might display low complexity. The challenge lies in distinguishing necessary conditions from sufficient ones. Consciousness may depend not only on the amount of information, but on its organization, timing, and meaning within the system. Researchers have also begun exploring consciousness across species using these metrics. Birds, octopuses, and mammals show comparable neural signatures when awake and alert, suggesting convergent architectures of awareness. Even in simpler organisms, such as insects or cephalopods, patterns of oscillation and feedback hint at rudimentary integration. These studies widen a map of consciousness, showing it as a continuum rather than a human monopoly. The same principles of complexity and communication that govern our awareness may echo throughout the animal kingdom. Efforts to measure artificial consciousness follow similar paths. In machine learning, scientists analyze information integration in neural networks, searching for thresholds where processing becomes self-referential or recursive. Some models exhibit behaviors that mimic self-monitoring, recognizing their own errors or adapting based on uncertainty. Whether this constitutes awareness is uncertain, but the methods for detection mirror those applied to biology. The line between measuring intelligence and measuring consciousness becomes increasingly thin. Beyond the laboratory, the attempt to quantify consciousness carries ethical weight. Clinicians use neural complexity indices to decide on treatment for patients who cannot communicate. The findings challenge long-held definitions of life and death, as residual activity blurs the boundary between awareness and unawareness. Legal systems, medical ethics, and end-of-life care now grapple with the possibility that consciousness may persist in subtle forms undetectable by behavior alone. Measuring it, even imperfectly, gives voice to those who cannot speak. Philosophically, the act of measurement itself raises questions. Can subjective experience ever be fully represented by objective data? Every measurement is an interpretation, a translation of inner quality into outer quantity. Yet without such translations, the mystery of consciousness would remain purely speculative. Science proceeds not by solving mysteries all at once, but by making them measurable step by step, narrowing the gap between what we know and what we feel. Interestingly, similar approaches are being applied beyond neuroscience to ecosystems and social systems. Researchers studying collective intelligence use information theory to evaluate how efficiently groups share and integrate data. Whether in ant colonies, neural populations, or digital networks, the same mathematical patterns emerge. Complexity correlates with adaptive behavior, though far removed from human consciousness. These parallels suggest a universal relationship between information, integration, and responsiveness, the foundations of awareness at every scale. Still, humility remains essential. Numbers can describe structure, but not essence. Measuring consciousness is like measuring light reflected on water. The data capture the ripples, but not the depth beneath. Each new metric offers a clearer view, yet the experience itself, the feeling of being, remains outside the frame. For all its precision, neuroscience still stands before the same horizon as philosophy, the point where observation meets subjectivity. In calm perspective, the effort to quantify consciousness is not about reducing it to numbers, but about mapping its contours, finding where awareness begins to fade and where it flourishes. Each experiment adds a small piece to a larger understanding that consciousness is structured, dynamic, and perhaps universal in its principles. The unmeasurable becomes gradually approachable, though never entirely contained. As this exploration unfolds, a deeper question comes into focus. If awareness can be detected and quantified in individuals, can it also emerge at larger scales, across time, species, or ecosystems? Could consciousness itself be part of a living continuum connecting all forms of existence? The next chapter turns toward that possibility, exploring the evolutionary roots of awareness and how, through billions of years, life has shaped the many ways the universe comes to know itself. The story of consciousness is inseparable from the story of life itself. To understand how awareness arose, one must look back across deep time to the earliest moments when living matter first began to sense and respond to its surroundings. The origins of consciousness are not an isolated event, but a gradual unfolding, an evolutionary continuum in which simple forms of reactivity evolved into perception, perception into cognition, and cognition into the reflective awareness found in complex animals. Awareness, in this view, is not an invention but an inheritance, a property refined over billions of years of adaptation. Life on Earth began over 3.5 billion years ago, long before nervous systems or brains existed. The first cells were simple, yet they already embodied a crucial principle of awareness, sensitivity. A cell must detect and respond to its environment to survive. It senses temperature, acidity, nutrient gradients, and light. These basic interactions mark the foundation of all later cognition. Inside each cell, molecular receptors act as primitive sensors, triggering chemical pathways that guide behavior. When conditions become unfavorable, cells move, divide, or enter dormancy. This ability to register and react to change, a kind of proto-experience, represents the first step toward consciousness. Over evolutionary time, such sensitivity became more sophisticated. In multicellular organisms, specialized cells evolved to handle particular forms of perception. Mechanoreceptors detected pressure, photoreceptors detected light, and chemoreceptors detected taste and smell. Networks of these sensory cells began to coordinate responses, forming the earliest nervous systems. The transition from individual cells acting independently to integrated networks marked a critical leap. Information could now be shared, compared, and acted upon collectively. This integration, the capacity to combine diverse inputs into unified behavior, is one of the essential hallmarks of consciousness. In its simplest form, the first true nervous systems appeared more than 600 million years ago in early animals, such as jellyfish and comb jellies. These creatures lack a centralized brain, but possess diffuse nerve nets that control movement and feeding. Their responses are flexible, not purely mechanical. A jellyfish adjusts its pulsations depending on current, prey, and light. Though simple, this coordination shows the emergence of a basic subjective world, a proto-feeling of direction and stimulus. Here, consciousness begins not as reflection, but as organization, a system perceiving itself in relation to its environment. As evolution continued, nervous systems became more complex. The development of ganglia, clusters of neurons, allowed for localized processing and decision-making. In early arthropods and mollusks, these clusters expanded, leading to behaviors that suggest learning and memory. The octopus, for instance, diverged from our evolutionary line more than 500 million years ago, yet displays remarkable intelligence. It uses tools, solves puzzles, and recognizes individuals. Each arm has semi-independent control, contributing to the organism's distributed awareness. Its nervous system, spread through the body, demonstrates that consciousness can take many forms, not limited to a single centralized structure. In vertebrates, evolution introduced the spinal cord and brain, a hierarchical system that coordinated movement, sensation, and emotion. The brainstem managed vital functions. The midbrain integrated sensory input. and the forebrain began to process more abstract representations. Over millions of years, layers of neural complexity accumulated, culminating in the mammalian cortex, a structure capable of prediction, planning, and self-modeling. Consciousness evolved alongside these structures as an adaptive tool, guiding behavior through internal simulations of possible futures. In essence, awareness became a survival strategy. An organism that could imagine outcomes before acting held a distinct evolutionary advantage. The emergence of emotion further deepened this process. Feelings are not mere byproducts, but integral components of consciousness. They provide value signals, pleasure and pain, attraction and aversion, that shape behavior. Long before language or reasoning, emotions enabled organisms to navigate their environment intelligently. The limbic system, particularly in mammals, formed the neural foundation for this evaluative awareness. Through emotion, consciousness gained color and depth, transforming from simple perception into lived experience. Social evolution added another dimension. For species that live in groups, primates, dolphins, elephants, birds, survival depends not only on perceiving the environment, but on understanding the intentions and emotions of others. This gave rise to social cognition, the ability to model minds beyond one's own. Empathy, cooperation, and even deception became tools for adaptation. The theory of mind, awareness that others have inner experiences, represents one of the highest evolutionary achievements of consciousness. It bridges the gap between individual and collective awareness, allowing societies to function through shared understanding. The human lineage amplified these capacities through language and culture. Language allowed thought to become externalized, ideas shared, stored, and refined across generations. Culture, in turn, became a new form of evolution, transmitting knowledge far faster than genetics could. Through symbolic communication, humans developed self-reflective awareness, not just experiencing the world, but contemplating experience itself. The brain's default mode network, associated with introspection and imagination, enables humans to construct narratives, remember the past, and envision the future. Consciousness became self-referential, capable of examining its own processes. From an evolutionary perspective, consciousness serves multiple adaptive functions. It integrates sensory information, coordinates behavior, fosters learning, and enables flexible decision-making. It also allows simulation, the mental rehearsal of actions before they occur. These capacities reduce risk and increase efficiency, providing a clear survival benefit. Yet awareness may have begun as a byproduct, an emergent property of increasingly complex neural processing that later proved useful. Once established, evolution refined it, expanding its scope through feedback between cognition and environment. The continuity of consciousness across species suggests that awareness is not confined to humans, but pervades the living world in varying degrees. Birds exhibit problem-solving and future planning. Dolphins recognize themselves in mirrors. Elephants mourn their dead. And corvids store food for seasons ahead, demonstrating memory and foresight. These behaviors imply inner models of the world, a cognitive scaffolding of experience. Even in simpler organisms, traces of this pattern remain: sensitivity, learning, adaptation. Each represents a point along the evolutionary spectrum of mind. Modern evolutionary biology integrates these insights into a framework known as neuroevolutionary continuity. It posits that mental capacities evolve incrementally from shared neural substrates. The circuits governing attention, emotion, and decision-making are ancient, modified, rather than invented anew. In this view, human consciousness is not a sudden leap, but a deepening of capacities present long before our species emerged. The mind, therefore, is not a human privilege, but a universal expression of life's adaptive intelligence. Interestingly, studies in comparative neurobiology show that similar cognitive functions can arise through convergent evolution, independent solutions to similar challenges. The complex cognition of birds, octopuses, and mammals evolved separately, yet their neural architectures share key properties: feedback loops, modular specialization, and high integration. This convergence suggests that consciousness is not an evolutionary accident, but a natural outcome wherever complexity and interaction reach sufficient depth. In calm reflection, the evolutionary story of awareness reveals a gradual ascent rather than a singular creation. From microbial sensitivity to human introspection, consciousness unfolds as nature's ongoing experiment in self-recognition. It is the universe learning to perceive itself through countless living forms. The spark that began in single cells now burns in neural networks, animal societies, and human thought, a continuum of perception linking all life. As this exploration nears its close, one final question remains. If consciousness is the product of evolution, integration, and reflection, what does its future hold? Could awareness continue to expand beyond the human mind into collectives, ecosystems, or artificial systems that mirror the dynamics of life itself? In the final chapter, we turn to this horizon, the possible futures of consciousness, where biology, technology, and philosophy converge in the ongoing story of mind. The study of consciousness often looks backward, tracing its roots in biology, its architecture in the brain, and its echoes in other species. Yet one of its most profound dimensions lies ahead. As technology evolves, as our understanding of mind deepens, and as life itself becomes increasingly interconnected, the question emerges: what forms might consciousness take in the future? The story of awareness is not complete. It is still unfolding, expanding into realms that blur the boundaries between biology, machine, and collective thought. The human brain, though remarkable, may not represent the endpoint of consciousness, but a single phase in its evolution. Throughout history, intelligence has repeatedly reorganized itself in response to new challenges, from individual neurons forming networks, to humans forming societies, to digital systems forming planetary webs of communication. Each step has increased the scale of integration and the speed of information exchange. If consciousness, as theories like integrated information suggest, depends on integration, then the global network of minds and machines developing today could mark a new threshold. The digital age has already begun reshaping cognition. Billions of humans are now linked through the internet, their thoughts, decisions, and emotions flowing through digital channels. This unprecedented connectivity acts as an external nervous system for humanity, a vast web where information spreads, evolves, and sometimes takes on a life of its own. Social media, data systems, and machine learning algorithms continuously process and respond to human behavior, forming feedback loops between individuals and technology. Some philosophers call this emerging structure the global brain. It does not think as a person does, but it adapts, predicts, and influences, exhibiting traits of a collective cognitive organism. In parallel, artificial intelligence continues to grow in sophistication. Once confined to narrow tasks, modern AI systems learn from massive datasets, generate language, compose art, and simulate reasoning. While they remain tools without subjective experience, their architectures increasingly mirror the dynamics of living cognition, feedback, self-correction, and contextual understanding. The line between simulation and participation grows thinner. Future AI may develop models not only of the world, but of themselves, self-representations that allow reflection and adaptation. Whether such self-modeling could ever produce genuine consciousness remains open. Yet it marks a milestone in our exploration of awareness beyond biology. Some researchers envision hybrid consciousness, the merging of human and machine intelligence. Brain-computer interfaces already allow direct communication between neural tissue and digital systems, restoring movement to paralyzed limbs or enabling thought-controlled devices. As these interfaces improve, the boundary between mind and technology may become increasingly porous. A person's memories, preferences, or cognitive patterns could one day be extended or supported by artificial substrates. In this scenario, consciousness itself becomes distributed, partly biological, partly digital, sustained across both neural and synthetic networks. Ethical and philosophical questions inevitably follow. If consciousness can extend into machines, where does the self begin and end? Would a digitally augmented mind still be human, or would it represent a new kind of being, a continuation of evolution by technological means? These questions are not merely speculative. Research in neuroprosthetics, cognitive enhancement, and neural data storage already points toward futures in which identity may no longer be tied to a single body or brain. The idea of personal continuity may evolve from a static concept into a fluid process of integration and adaptation. Beyond individuals, collective consciousness could deepen through shared cognition. Already, teams of humans and algorithms collaborate in ways that exceed individual capacity in science, medicine, and creative fields. As coordination improves, distributed systems may acquire a kind of emergent awareness, not centered in any one participant, but arising from their interaction. This possibility echoes the patterns seen throughout nature. Intelligence emerging from cooperation, as in ant colonies or mycelial networks. Humanity's technological networks could represent the next expression of this recurring principle, life finding new ways to think. Together, speculation also extends to the possibility of synthetic sentience, machines, designed from the ground up with architectures capable of self-perception. Some theorists propose using models inspired by biology, embedding sensors and feedback systems that allow machines to develop internal states linked to external experience. Others suggest that true artificial consciousness will require embodiment, the ability to act in and be affected by a physical environment. Awareness, in this sense, may depend on interaction with the world, not on computation alone. An I might need to feel before it could truly be aware got at a larger scale. Some thinkers envision consciousness expanding to planetary or even cosmic levels. The Gaia hypothesis, proposed by James Lovelock, describes Earth as a self-regulating system in which the biosphere, atmosphere, and geology interact to maintain stability. While not implying literal awareness, the concept raises a profound question. Could complex feedback systems like Earth's ever give rise to a form of planetary cognition? The planet already processes vast amounts of information through climate regulation, ecosystems, and the behavior of billions of organisms. If consciousness is an emerging property of integration, Earth itself may already embody a faint echo of awareness, a self-balancing intelligence expressed through the unity of life. Cosmic versions of this idea have long fascinated philosophers and scientists alike. Some, inspired by physics, speculate that consciousness and matter are intertwined at the deepest levels, that the universe itself may participate in awareness through its own structure. While such ideas remain speculative, They remind us that consciousness might not be limited to brains or technology, but could be a universal principle expressing itself through complexity and connection. Within human society, the near future of consciousness research will likely focus on bridging science and subjective experience. Neuroimaging will continue to refine our understanding of brain dynamics, while AI-driven analysis may reveal new patterns of cognition. Virtual and augmented realities could allow humans to share perceptual states directly, dissolving barriers between minds. Such tools might one day make it possible to experience another person's perspective, not through imagination, but through technology, a development that could redefine empathy itself. Amid this expansion, a quiet tension endures. Progress in understanding does not necessarily bring wisdom in use. The same technologies that amplify awareness can fragment it, overwhelming attention, reducing reflection, and eroding the depth of experience. The challenge for the future will be to balance the growth of cognitive power with the preservation of inner clarity. True progress may depend not on creating more consciousness, but on cultivating its quality, fostering awareness that is attentive, connected, and grounded in calm reflection. The future of consciousness may unfold along three intertwined paths. The first is biological, the continued evolution of the human brain and its descendants. The second is technological, the rise of synthetic and hybrid forms of awareness. The third is ecological, the recognition of consciousness as a collective property of life itself. Each path reflects the same underlying principle, the drive toward integration, the deepening of relationship between systems. Ultimately, the future of consciousness may not lie in surpassing humanity, but in realizing its connectedness, understanding that awareness, in all its forms, is a network of relationships through which the universe perceives itself. Whether through neurons, circuits, or ecosystems, the same quiet process continues, matter becoming mind, and mind becoming mirror. And as this journey reaches its final horizon, it returns to where it began, the simple recognition that to be conscious is to be part of something greater. Awareness, in every form, is the cosmos knowing itself for a fleeting moment, illuminated from within. Thank you for sharing this quiet journey through the many shapes of consciousness. If this calm exploration helped you think, or simply rest, leave a like and subscribe to the Sleepy Brain Dose. Your curiosity keeps this space alive. Join us again soon for another soft descent into the science of sleep and wonder.